Hi, this is Marlene with Miami Ghost Chronicles, and I want to welcome you to another episode of Stories of the Supernatural. Wherever you find us, whether it's a video or podcast on your favorite platform, please like and subscribe to us so that you can get notification of when a new show is released. You can also find us on major social media platforms. If you go to miamighostchronicles.com, you can find links to the videos or MP3 files, which you can download and enjoy without commercial interruptions. If you're into classic horror, ghost, and adventure stories, I narrate Nightshade Diary, and you can find links at nightshadediary.com. If scary stories are your bag, and listening to encounters with cryptids, ghosts, dogman, and other weird creatures sends a shiver up your spine, then go to supernaturalstorytime.com for links to our weekly podcasts. Noteworthy news about the paranormal world, true crime, conspiracy stories, and anything that is just plain weird can be found at eerie.news or visit the Stranger Than Fiction Stories tab at miamighostchronicles.com. Please subscribe to my newsletter on Substack. Just go to mppellicer.com for a link. I want to thank you for being part of my audience, and I think you are all wonderful. Hi, everybody. How's everybody doing? Good? I'm good. Everything is good. I know that the show is a little bit staggered, but anyway, when you hear it, Happy New Year. It's we're almost into the new year, 2023. I'm going to say it again because I've said it for the last few shows. If seems like the other day we were worried about Y2K, here we are, 23 years later, and it's like, okay, so there we go. Which makes you wonder sometimes, do we worry too much about things that never come to pass? Because sometimes people they tell them, oh, you're like the ostrich, people that stick their heads in the sand and they don't want to see where there's things that need to get taken care of. But then the flip side of that is that sometimes we worry about things that never, in other words, whether it's fed to us or just we worry about things that never come to pass. And believe me, and I know there's people out there in the audience that either were children not even born in the year 2000, but this was really hyped up. The Y2K thing was a big deal. It was like economies are going to crash because the computers don't know how to turn over, whatever. I mean, you name it. Movies came out. Okay, movies came out about the end of the world, as we know it. Meteors were coming our way. I mean, you name it, guys. Like, talk biblical. That was it. And now, 23 years later, it's like, And then I believe it was in 2012 that they had the Mayan calendar thing. Yep, same thing. So I think it's a mixture of both. It's sometimes that in other words, sometimes some of the things that are fed to us through the media, through shows and stuff like that, and movies, people making money, of course, we got to take it with a grain of salt, like say, this is just entertainment. And then, of course, yeah, there's other things that we should look at. But the point being that I'm a person that always likes to be hopeful when the new year's coming in. And we've had a rough couple of years, but now I think we need to look forward and expect good things. How's that? Expect good things. And God, what was her name? Oh my God, I can't remember. There was a psychic. She's French Canadian. I can't remember her name. Oh my God. Anyway, she would say that was one of her things about expecting good things, and that's why good things come to you. In other words, you know how they talk about people, good luck. You know how some people are lucky, and man, they're lucky, um, and I'm not talking just about, oh, they won the lotto. I'm talking about lucky as in good things come to them or happen for them. And I remember her. This was many years ago. Oh, Marlene, I wish I could remember her name. She would say that a lot of that trick, if you want to call it, because it's not a trick, is that she expected good things. Like, in other words, if you want to call it a magnet, if you want to talk vibration, however, manifestation, I don't care what angle, but it's one of those things that, so my message for the new year is expect good things and let them come to you. All right. And believe it or not, and like I've always said, when you're hopeful, hope is the remedy for a lot of things. Okay. It doesn't mean it's going to resolve everything, but it lets you percolate ideas of how to resolve difficulties, whether they're small ones or major ones. All right. So there we go. Now let's get on to the good part. The good part is who is a guest today on Stories of the Supernatural. This is the first time this gentleman's been here. His name is Robert Lindsy Milne. He's a psychic, intuitive counselor, teacher, healer, and life coach. He is recognized across the continent as one of the most insightful psychic intuitive counselors of his time. At a very young age, he realized his psychic gifts and started his first job working as a psychic intuitive doing readings at the Cozy Tea Room in Toronto. Robert has traveled the world giving insight with his psychic intuitive sessions to tens of thousands of people and has become recognized across the continent as one of the most insightful counselors of his time. Robert has also worked with the police and Canadian Secret Service, helping to gather intel and work on missing persons cases. Currently, Robert is hosting his podcast, My Side of the Crystal Ball. You can find the show on all the popular platforms, including iHeartRadio. He's also an award-winning baker. Oh, great. Help me welcome him. How are you doing today, Robert?
I'm doing well, and thank you very much for having me on your show today.
On the contrary.
We were talking a little bit before, and
Yes.
we are just talking about being normal and everything. I
Yeah.
like to think of myself as that.
Right, right.
I,
It's
I
like,
I would like to be like that.
I think sometimes people think that if you're psychic or something that you walk around all the time, like in a psychic daze, and I imagine that that's not the case all the time, right?
It's not the case all the time, and it's something that I work at. Being turned off sometimes. I am I do have a sense of awareness most of the time, nonetheless. And
Mhm.
and if something occurs, I usually know if I should react to it or not react to it. If like a
Okay.
noise outside, oh yes, I know that. So that would be if I was at home and feeling really safe in my home. I think that when I go out, that instinctive circle of protection is
Okay.
around me. But that was developed as when I was a child. I was the first time I was on the streets, homeless. I was
I was
14,
going to
and
ask you, and you're going to
yeah.
beat me to that question. It says here you developed your abilities as a child. Is this what you're talking about now? This time period in your life?
Well, actually, that happened earlier, but sorry, the recognition and the developing.
Okay.
When I was about 14, for the first time, I was on the street, homeless, and then I got brought back home, and then when I was around 15, again, I left home and never fully lived with my family again. And
Mm-hmm.
the way that I got off the streets was surviving by my intuition, my psychic ability, and awareness.
Okay.
And during that time, I heard that if you worked at the Cozy Tea Room in Toronto, and it wasn't really very cozy at all. It was kind of a dump, but 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 I worked there. And I heard that if you worked at the Cozy Tea Room and you
Mm-hmm.
did tea leaves and card readings, because that's what you had to do, you would get a cup of tea, sandwiches, and a cookie. If
Oh,
you worked in the afternoon, and you would get paid at the end of the shift, and if you worked at night, you had a hot dinner, cookies, and a cup of tea, and you got paid. And I applied there. I had never done a tea leaf reading before. I'd never done a psychic. I'd never done a card
okay.
reading before. But I phoned the woman. Mrs. Cox was her name, and I told her that I was a psychic and that I could do readings. And she invited me over, and I went there. And I had, the audition was do a reading for Mrs. Cox.
I was about to say, did
That's
she like
right.
put you?
Well, she wasn't going to let me out, alone with her customers, without being tested. So the purpose was do a reading for her. And like I said, I had never done a tea leaf reading before, never even thought of it, and never done a card reading, but I had done psychic readings. So
Okay.
what I did, because I was, pretty much a survivalist,
I was gonna say you. This was let me. You had a lot writing on that reading.
oh, my whole life.
Yeah, yeah. I
and
hate to say it, but yeah.
and what I did was I picked up the teacup, and I had the little globs of stuff in it, and I held it up like I'm holding this, and I
Right.
held it. Better be careful, I'll spill this. And I held the cup in front of me like that, and I looked inside the teacup and over the edge of the teacup and looked at her too. And I didn't look at really anything in the tea leaves. I just talked about what I saw, what I felt.
Okay.
And then when it was came time to put the cards on the table, so to speak,
Mm-hmm.
I put them on the table and I had no idea what they meant. But when I was talking, doing a reading for her, I would point to this and this and this and this, and entwine it in what I was saying. And I got hired that day.
So let me ask you, did she, when you were giving her the reading, she didn't give you any indicators if you're on track or not? She let you hang out there, huh?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. Yes.
Oh, absolutely. She didn't help me at all. And I got the job.
Okay.
And I started that day.
All
And
right.
that day I worked in the afternoon and I worked in the evening. So I got, a sandwich in the afternoon and a cup of tea and some cookies. And then in the evening I had a hot dinner and a cup of tea and cookies, and I got paid. And that night I had a place to sleep.
I was gonna say,
And
where were you sleeping, Robert?
here and there on the street,
Oh my God.
wherever I could.
That is, I know
Um,
that you were a teenager, but still, that's still a very young age to be on the streets.
and that night I had a place to sleep.
Was
And
there,
it
was what there?
No,
Or
no,
some,
no, no,
no,
no.
some
I
other
had
place?
money to go to a
Oh, okay,
place,
now I understand. In other words,
right?
you could pay
I
for a
could, I
place to
could, I
sleep.
could. That's right. I
Okay,
had
I
a
get it
place to
now.
sleep. Yeah, I had the money, and I had a place to sleep. And the next day, I had a job to go to,
That made all the difference, huh?
and I worked at the Cozy Tea Room until I was about 21 years old, and I
Okay.
worked there 5 days a week, sometimes 6 days a week. Um, Sometimes I worked 7 days a week because there was another guy there by the name of Red Hawk. He was the star of the city. He would get private parties, and he would
Okay.
always ask if I'd like to come along. And if he had them, then that week I'd work 7 days a week,
Okay.
and I did that, and that's how I again developed and honed some of my abilities.
So let me ask you, the tea room, what was it? People would come there, buy tea, and at the same time get a reading? Is that how it would work?
That's correct. The whole purpose was to get the reading.
Right.
In those days, and by the way, those days weren't that long ago. In those days, um, it was against the law to do psychic readings.
Oh, I know where this is going.
Okay,
Yes.
in fact, it didn't even become legal. Well, decriminalized.
Right, right, right.
Actually, it was just wiped out. And it was um, July 1st, I think it was 2019. It might have been 2018. It was, by the way, same day they legalized cannabis, but I'm not. I don't know if there's any
What a
connection, but
coincidence,
I don't
huh?
know, but the two happened on the same
So
day.
all this time, basically, anybody trying to operate like a tea room had
Since
to
about
make it look
18,
like
since
something
about
else.
1865.
Well, how long?
Those laws were on the book. It was called the Witchcraft Act, and it stated anyone who fraudulently, and there were three
Hmm.
or four subsections. First one was tells fortunes for a consideration. Section B um, accuses somebody of a crime using an occult or crafty science. Um, Fraudulently heals someone using an occult or crafty science. I can't remember the fourth.
Okay.
Is punishable by summary conviction of not more than $5,000 and not more than 1 year in jail. That was on
Whoa.
since about 1865 up until then. So the rules were Mrs. Cox was selling sandwiches and tea.
Ah,
And as an entertainment, because there'd be signs on the wall say all readings are
our
for entertainment
entertainment.
purposes.
Uh-huh. Okay.
Okay, so you were buying a cup of tea and cookies to get your tea leaf read
I
as a
understand
playful thing,
now.
right? But people took it pretty seriously.
I'm sure.
Mhm.
Yeah, okay. Like you said, people are really going there not for the sandwiches, but for a reading. but
Well,
everybody understood.
well, actually, so I went there differently. I went there for the sandwiches
Okay, well,
and to do
you were a
readings.
whole your
And,
motivation was totally like
that's right.
it's
And do
called
readings. Yeah.
survival.
Yeah.
And let me how long has she had that tea room?
Oh, it had been around for a long time.
Okay.
It was a landmark.
Really? Okay.
Oh yeah.
Okay. That's what I
And
thought. It sounded like that.
it and it was in her house. I guess her children moved out because it was a 3-floor house. And the ground floor, the front room was turned into the tea room, and then the kitchen was converted into a real professional kitchen, and then the
Okay.
upstairs, and there were some readers on the ground floor, and then upstairs, in a couple of the different bedrooms that were made all the time, and we did our readings. My room was right at the very top of the stairs, but it was somebody's bedroom at
Right,
one
right. But
time.
she was like she was
Right.
she was a businesswoman there.
And,
She's like,
then down the hall where Red Hawk was, Red Hawk, down the hall where Red Hawk was, it was a much bigger room, but
okay.
once again, it was somebody's bedroom.
Right.
Red
And
Hawk was the star. This is like 60 years ago.
right.
Red Hawk was the star of. I'm sorry, not it was 50 years ago. Red Hawk was the star of the city in those days. He was well, I don't know how old he was. He looked old to me, but I was 15. So
Everybody looks old when you're
and
50.
he was part indigenous, and he
Mm-hmm.
came from the Seven Nations Reserve just near Toronto, but he always maintained that he was of another race as well. And when the pretty young girls would come to him for readings,
Mm-hmm.
he would ask them where they're from, and they would tell him, and he would say, well, that he was part Aboriginal and part whatever
Yeah,
the
like
girl was.
the
Yeah, yeah.
exactly.
And he had one of his legs partially amputated, so he had a wooden leg. And
Holy.
he was the star, and he was the star of the city, and he also used to like to drink a lot.
Oh, that's
And at the beginning of the day, we would,
oh.
the tea room would open at 11:30 in the morning,
Uh-huh.
and people would come in, and then we'd start doing readings at noon. Well, Red Hawk would, show up at 11:45, and the tea room would be filled. Everyone was there for him. He would be booked up before he even got there. And anybody else that came in, they would say, well, Red Hawk's book, how about going to see, well, in those days I was called Bob Milne. That's what I got.
Uh-huh.
Or the hippie reader. That was the
Okay.
other one. And a lot of us at first, well, I certainly did at first, made money by the ones that Red Hawk couldn't do.
All right. It was like,
So,
okay.
but he did like to drink, and he always would have a jar in his
Let me tell you
duffel
something. I
bag.
imagine those readings must have gotten wilder and wilder as the day progressed if
Well,
he
I
was drinking.
guess, yeah. So, and I worked down the hall from him for 5 or 6 years, but on a slow day, well, Mrs. Cox, when he wasn't looking, she would go through his bag to make
Uh-huh.
sure that there wasn't any whiskey in it.
Okay.
And on a slow day, sometimes Red Hawk would leave, get in the cab, and then go to the liquor store and come back.
I was like, hey, no, I'm
Yeah,
bored.
and there was this one day, um, he took his leg off. But now sometimes he would take his leg off, by the way, right? And on this day, it was a slow day. He took his leg off and fell asleep on the bed. And Mrs. Cox came upstairs, and she took his leg,
Oh
right?
my
And
God.
she takes his leg, and she stores it downstairs, because she doesn't want him to get up, get in a cab, and go get some whiskey, because she
So
wants him to do readings.
she took his leg. All
Yeah,
right.
she took his leg. So now all of a sudden we get busy. Red Hawk wakes up,
Oh my God.
and he sees he can't find his leg. So he hops down the hall and he leans over the banister. Now the whole place is full.
I
And
was
he
about to
leans
ask
over
you.
the
Don't
banister.
tell me there were clients there
Oh, the
already.
place, filled. And he's leaning over the banister saying, Pearl was the waitress, right? And he's
Uh-huh.
saying, Pearl, Pearl, bring me my goddamn leg back. Come on now.
Oh my God, I can imagine those clients must have been like,
That
what?
that happened. Things like that happen. Regularly at the tea room.
I
And
bet
you just never knew.
Now let
Yeah.
me ask you,
Yes.
looking back, was Red
Yes.
Hawk as good as people thought, or was he just a product of hype? I'm not saying that he wasn't psychic, but as good as people thought, was he just more of a product of hype than anything else?
Red Hawk was the number one person of the era.
Okay.
There's no comparison to what he did to what anybody else was doing
Okay.
or anybody else after. So it was what was going on at the time. And
Mm-hmm.
at the time, that style, he was the star. How he was the star, I don't know. I always thought I was better than him,
Okay.
but I was a kid, right? But that's
Okay.
another
Well,
story.
and the reason why I ask you is sometimes people, like you said, like he got booked, and it's like people go because everybody else is going,
Sure.
and he must be great,
Well,
you know.
the thing is that he'd been doing it a long time.
Mm-hmm.
Um, he had a very good reputation, and
Okay.
so he was the star for that era. He was a good guy, like I said, he was really nice to me. He would,
Okay.
he would get extra gigs on Sundays, and he would bring me along. He was a really
Yeah.
good guy, um, but he was old fashioned.
Okay.
Um, he was old fashioned, and he was in this area poorly educated.
Okay.
There wasn't very much knowledge about psychic things
Right.
in the 1960s. There wasn't that much information.
Right.
So, and there was nowhere or hardly anywhere that people could go to learn about it.
Right. It was just by
That's
the seat of
right.
your pants kind of deal.
That's right. So he was a person of his time,
Okay.
and that time is gone
Oh
and
yeah.
and and, and done with.
Yeah, no,
So,
that
but people came back and he was a good guy. And
let me tell
and
you something.
and
That is
and
such a great story though, that thing with the wooden leg being
yeah, I know it is.
absconded with
I was horrified by it, but
So you said that you were there at the tea room till you were 21, and
about
then what
21,
happened
yeah.
after that?
Well, I used to get fired a lot, and I used to quit a lot.
Okay.
Um, I was a hard worker, and I was really dedicated. I was never late. I was, anytime I got called, I'd call in. But I noticed that in the tea room, it cost $2.50 to get a tea leaf, a cup of tea and a sandwich.
Okay.
But they weren't getting a cup of tea and a sandwich. They were getting a reading.
Okay.
And the reader got $1, and the tea room got $1.50.
All right.
And I looked around, and even as a kid, I saw all these old, worn out, tragic live people doing
Mm-hmm.
readings. And all of us were, I guess. Um, and almost all of them were alcoholics.
All
Okay,
right.
so all of them, including me, well, I wasn't declared that at 15, but certainly later on in my life, I indeed was an alcoholic, and you always are. So, and it's been like 25 years or something since I drank, but everybody was alcoholic.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody was chain smoking. Everybody lived a really lousy life. They didn't
Right.
do very well. And I
Okay.
looked around, and I saw Mrs. Cox making a living from people like me.
Okay.
And it bothered me that because of people like me, she got $1.50
Okay.
and people like me got $1. So it bothered me. Um, I didn't, now remember, I was a kid, you know,
Sure.
15, 16. I didn't understand there's rent, there's, you know, there's
But you know
mortgages,
what?
there's,
Considering you were that young, you had a lot of insight to look at these people that were working with you and seeing the quality of their lives. And I
oh, it's
imagine part
horrible.
of you must have been thinking, that's not where I want to end up at.
Well, that's exactly what, except in those days, there was nowhere else to go. That was
Right. But
it, right? Okay. So, I went through that for about, and sometimes I would get angry with Mrs. Cox and she'd get angry with me, and I'd get fired or quit or get fired, and you know, I'd be gone for a little while, and as soon as like we got near the end of the month, you know, she'd either call me and or I'd call her because, you know, rent
all
day,
right.
you know, and
Break up to make up or make up to
yeah,
break
something
up
like
or
that,
okay.
and I was very popular after a short amount of time,
Okay.
and I was, you know, number two to Red Hawk.
Okay.
Like I had established my own clientele, and other people were making money by readings I couldn't do. You
So
know,
you were a money maker, in other
oh,
words.
I was a man. Oh, you bet, I was a producer. Well,
Hmm.
that's why she would call me back because I was a producer.
Of course.
Um, and then I don't know. Anyway, as I said, one day I either got fired or quit or whatever, and I just decided that was it.
Because you were like, and you know what? But in other words, because I guess I imagine your life had stabilized from when you
Yes.
started with
Well,
her.
that's right. That's
And you
right.
were what did you think? Man, I can't spend the rest of my days doing
Well,
readings at the tea room,
actually,
right?
that went on. So, at the time, or while I was at the tea room, I then, instead of moving into the flop houses, I moved into a Fleabag hotel. It was called Larry's Hideaway, and I
Okay.
rented a room. And while I was working at the tea room, I was doing pretty well, and I could always pay my rent. Anyway, when I quit or retired, I got fired. One of the three, and probably all. All of a sudden, and I went from getting paid $1 a reading, I increased to $5 a reading, and
Oh,
everybody around that hotel knew that I did what I did, and
okay.
they, my nickname was Psychic at the time, by the way, and
Okay.
you know, the place was filled with you know, the ladies of the evening, their
Mhm.
partners, single working men, and people that rented rooms for an hour at a time,
Mhm.
and then, you know, full timers, and so they were my clients, you know, doing readings for them,
I
and
was about to say, why do I see that? They were like, "Man, we got an in-house psychic.
oh yeah.
Let's go to this guy."
Oh yes. Oh, of course. Anyway, I quickly fell behind in my rent, and this went on for a little bit. And there was a guy that worked at the hotel, and his name was Whitey, and he certainly was a lot younger than I am now, but he was old. And
Okay.
I really liked Whitey. He worked 4 nights a week, and anyway, he died. Not on the job. He died at home. And
Right.
when I heard that, I went to the owner of the hotel, and I said to him, could I have Whitey's job, but I don't want to get paid? How about a better room in exchange? So how about I work here? I get a better room and room and board in exchange for working there. And he said, "Great, you're hired." And all of a sudden, I didn't have to worry about making my overhead. I didn't have to worry about eating. I could just you know, work there at night, and then
Mhm.
do my stuff later. That's also how I started learning how to. I taught myself how to read and write during those days, because I had those late nights at the hotel. There would be nobody around after all the girls had, you know, completed their
So
tasks.
basically, you were like, yeah, like you were what the one because the place was open 24/7 kind of deal,
Yeah,
and
and
you
I
were the
was the
one.
night. I was 4 nights a week. I was in the night desk
Okay,
clerk. Okay,
I
and
see.
and 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 in those days, Toronto closed at midnight. So
Okay.
by 2 o'clock in the morning, the place was as quiet as a church.
Okay.
And it was at that time that I was able to, I went to this library across the street and I said, I can't read very well. Could you recommend a book or two? And it
Okay.
was then that I started to learn to read, and I worked there for 4 or 5 years
Okay.
in
So
exchange
now
for
you're
reading the book. Yeah.
that's incredible. So now here you are in your mid-20s.
Yeah, and so here's what's happening. So now I'm out here, and everybody loves me at the hotel, and it's a sleaze bag anyway. And I'm doing readings for ladies of the evening, drug addicts, pimps, street people, and and I'm thinking, you know what? This is not what I have in mind. I'm saying, okay, this is not what I'm going to do. And in fact, if it was at this point that
Okay.
I made a deal with the universe,
Okay.
and I said, if you hear somebody drinking in the back, it's one of my golden retrievers. He's
I
having a
have I have I have 8 dogs. Do
okay.
not worry
So
about that.
at that point, I said, if I'm going to do this work, I have to live well. And if
Okay.
I don't live well, I'm not doing the job. And I made that vow. So I started thinking, how could I get recognized? Now we're talking about 1974.
Okay.
Okay, 1973, 1974. There wasn't any way to advertise or do anything. It was okay. So
Okay.
I was thinking,
Plus, it's against the law.
and plus it's against the law, but very
I
few
know,
people
but what
ever
I'm
got
saying
busted.
is it's
Yeah,
like how, like
yeah.
it's like you're just like
So
okay.
I thought to myself, now this had never been done in Canada.
Okay.
Nobody had ever heard of this before. I said to myself, if I can do a reading for somebody in person,
All right.
could I do a reading for somebody on the telephone? And I
Ah.
thought, hey, well, there's only one way to find out, right? So, and this hotel was the old hotel, and you had to use the plug in,
The
and
switchboard kind of
yeah,
deal.
had to pick up the phone, and and in those days I got room and board, but I had to pay 50 cents for a phone call. Um, so I would get the guy on the desk. He would dial a friend of mine, and I would call, and I would practice doing psychic readings. And
Okay.
then I'd practice with a bunch of people. And then I asked friends that if they could tell friends about me and
Okay.
that could I call them and do psychic readings. And I did that for almost a year,
Okay.
and then I just gave my name out to everybody. If you
So
want
let
a
me ask you
psychic
something.
reading,
When you were doing that, how were you
I was
getting paid,
practicing.
Robert?
Pardon?
Oh, you weren't getting paid. This was for
No,
free?
I was practicing. I
Oh,
was
okay,
I
okay,
was trying
okay.
to figure out how to do it. So
Oh, so
then after just calling people, then I said, okay, anybody out there,
all
just
right.
call me. So I'd get a phone call in the middle of the night. Hey, it's Joe. What can you tell me? And I'd go from asleep to awake. And
Okay.
then the realization came, how do you
Okay.
get paid?
Ah, yes.
And I how do you get paid? Well, I didn't know. I'm certainly not going to do a reading for somebody and they'll say they send a check.
Right.
I was a street kid, so I got
Yeah.
that
Cash is king kind of deal. Yeah.
sure. And so I thought, oh, okay. Nobody's going to, and by the way, very few people even had credit cards. They were
Right,
just,
right. No, no, I know that's what I'm saying. This is the
yeah,
70s.
that's
This
right.
was
So like, how could I get the money? And then I said, if I can do readings on the telephone, could I do readings on the telephone on the radio?
okay.
Well, okay. Well, once again, there's only one way to find out.
Okay.
And a friend of mine, she was from a little town north of Toronto called Aurelia. and I'd visited her a few times, and it was a nice little town. It still is, by the way, and a lot of famous people come from Aurelia too. Anyway, there was a radio station there, and it was either CJOR or CFOR. I appeared at both of them. One was a Vancouver talk station, and the other one was in Aurelia, and it was just a little small town radio station. And I called the station.
Okay.
And I said, my name is, and by the way, it went from Bob Milne, right, to Robert Lindsay Milne, which really is my name.
Okay.
And I said, hi, I'm Robert Lindsay Milne, and I, tell him. And incidentally, the program director, the morning man, and the talk show host was the same guy. That's how small the station was. So anyway, I called the guy. His name's Rusty Draper, and he was kind of like a bulldogish kind of guy. And I said to him, "This is what I can do for your audiences." And he said, "Yeah, okay. If you can do what you say, you're on my show tomorrow morning at 10 after 9. And if you can't do what you say, you're off my show by 20 after 9. Other than that, come on up." And I said, "Okay." I didn't have any money. I had no, like zero.
I love these stories. I'm sorry. I know that right then and there, that was a tough moment.
Okay.
But you know what? You know what I like about what you're so far, Robert? You didn't feel sorry for yourself. I'm listening to your
sorry for other people. I always
no. But there's people that get in the same circumstances as what you have been going through. Yeah. They kind of have all these excuses why, and you were like always percolating, like how, like what you said. I wonder if I can do this on the phone. Hey, wait a minute. I wonder if I can do this on the radio on the phone.
Well, it was I didn't want to quit.
Okay.
I didn't want to quit. I wanted to keep doing it, but I didn't want to live like those others.
Sure. Absolutely. Yeah.
So, and when Marlene, when I say that I didn't have any money, I was zero. Mm-hmm. And I was on, in Aurelia was like 100 miles away.
Okay.
I hitchhiked to
Aurelia. My God.
Now,
oh my God, this is the 70s. I forgot. Hitchhiking was
now, the radio, the talk show was specifically broadcast from the Howard Johnsons in Aurelia, and it was a remote broadcast because they did have a radio station, but it was done from the restaurant because Howard Johnson's was paying for the advertising, so people would come into the restaurant to have food. And right?
Oh my God, I had that blast from the past. Howard Johnson. Okay, right. Keep going.
So I hitchhiked up to Aurelia the night before, and I slept in the park that night. And the lake surrounding Aurelia is called Lake Couchiching. And I swam in the lake for my bath and shower. And, I kind of dried off and I walked to the Howard Johnson's. And I must have looked pretty scruffy because, someone saying, "Excuse me, what are you here for?" Right. And I said, "Oh, I'm here to see Rusty. I'm going to be on the show today," or something like that. And they brought me into this dining room and there was nobody there, just empty. But the technician's setting up the show. Anyway, Rusty shows up and, he says, "Okay, we're going to be starting here." And this was like a live in-person broadcast, and it was going out live on the air as well at the same time. But there was nobody in the restaurant. And so we start off, and he's not really being all that respectful to me. And then he says, "Okay, and he says, okay, so if you're so psychic, tell me something about me or whatever." And I said, "Okay, I'm thinking about someone with red hair, and has a last name something like Richardson, and it's a business meeting." And he looked at me. And he said, "Stop talking about this." Then we
Oh.
went to a commercial, and he said, I don't know how you know this, but I was being interviewed for another job.
Oh, Jesus.
Right.
Oh my God, Robert was like double barrel. Here you go.
So now we go back on the air and we start taking phone calls.
He was like, "Yeah, man, let's talk. We talk to somebody else, but not me."
We start taking phone calls, and I was under the assumption that the show was going to be on from like 9:10 to 10 o'clock. So we start taking phone calls. Now, this had never been done.
Okay.
It was the first time it had ever been done in Canada. We didn't even hear about it from the state the first time. So all of a sudden, people start coming into the restaurant, and by like 9:30, the place is full.
Okay.
And people are coming up to the microphone, asking questions. I'm doing stuff, taking phone calls, and people are buying coffee and stuff like that.
Right.
And then at about 10 to 10, Rusty says, "Can you stay another hour?" And I said, well, yeah, sure. I've never done this before, and it was a rush, right? And then, it was brand new.
So let me ask you, people were calling in and you were giving them the reading over the phone.
Yep.
And of course they're so all these people in the town are hearing this and they're going, man, we're going to the Howard Johnson.
And they came to Howard Johnson.
Wow.
Okay, so now the place is packed. And then by 10 to 10, there are people outside because this had never been done.
Oh, wow.
So anyway, we go then, and then I go from 10 to 10:20. And then they clear the restaurant and they fill it again.
Oh, wow.
So, and I'm still going, right? And now it's like 10:45. And Rusty says, "Can you stay another hour?" The show, by the way, was only supposed to be 1 hour. I didn't know what it was, right? So he says, "Can you stay another hour?" And I say, "Yeah, of course." So again, the restaurant was filled, and 3 times during that, and so now we do the third hour. We get like 20 to 12, and I'm starting to fade because like I haven't eaten since the day before.
Right,
I slept. Yeah. I slept on a park bench. And even though I was a kid, I was a little tired, and
yes.
I looked at Rusty and said, I have to stop at noon, and he said, "Yeah, okay." So the show's over, and this part was a bit of a blur. It still is for me. And the show was over, and I got up and stepped down off the platform, and then just people swarmed me. And I was blown away by what I had experienced. I was burned out by what I had experienced, and it was like I was in just like a whole different world. And these people were just around me, and they were saying things to me, and I nothing was making sense, and I was really quite overwhelmed. And Rusty and the owner of Howard Johnson's, one guy grabbed me by each arm and pulled me away.
I bet.
And then we went into the owner's office, and they sat me down, and they said, "Could you stay over tomorrow and be on the show?" And I said, "Well, no, I have to go home today because I haven't eaten since yesterday. I slept in the park. I'm tired, and I'm hungry, and I just want to go home now." And the guy that owned Howard Johnson said, "Well, we can take care of you here." And Rusty said, "By the way, do you do readings?" And remember, $5 a reading, right? And I said, well, yes, I do. And he said, "Well, we could have, if anybody would be interested, we could have one of the girls at the station." Actually, he probably said one of the gals at the station, book appointments if anyone's interested. And he said, "How much do you charge?" And I said, $25 a reading.
I love it. Yes.
And he said,
I know he's not going to say no $5.
That's right. And he says, "Oh, you'll never get that here." And I said,
Uh,
I don't care.
right.
I've been living at this flea bag hotel.
Right.
Now I'm at Howard Johnson's. The owner says to me, you can stay over here. You can have anything you want.
Right.
Okay. Larry's Hideaway, Howard Johnson. Okay.
Yeah.
All
Uh-huh.
right. So I don't get any readings. Fine. Then I go home with a full belly the next morning or the next
Right.
afternoon. So then the guy says to me, if anybody is interested in booking an appointment, you can stay here as long as you need to do the readings. Again, same deal. And I say, okay. So we do the show and they booked. Are you hanging onto your chair? 130 readings.
Oh my God, Robert. That guy must have been like, what?
130
So
readings.
how long did you end up staying
I
there?
was I was there about 10 9 days. But you
Okay.
see, people were coming into the hotel anyway, and people were coming into the hotel even just to say hello to me because nobody
Okay.
had experienced this before.
Okay.
So I was bringing lots in anyway.
All right.
So as I'm sitting there doing my readings, and I'm watching this wad of money, it
And you're
just
like,
keeps getting bigger and bigger. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, so you're not going to hitchhike home.
yep.
And I'm thinking, okay, well, you can take a bus. And I'm saying, oh yeah, that's good, good. Right. And then, I'm the wad's getting bigger and bigger
And you're
and
like,
bigger. And then I think, well, you could take the train. And the wad's getting bigger and bigger. And then you
right.
say, okay, you could take a cab. Yeah, that's it. I'm going to take a cab. Then I say, well, hey, maybe, maybe I can catch an airplane flight to Toronto. So I call Aurelia Airport to see if Air Canada lands there, and it doesn't. But the guy says, well, we have charter flights to Toronto. And I said, how much is that? And he told me. And I had this wad of money in my pocket. So I finished all my readings and I made more money than I thought was ever in the world. And on the day that I left, I took my bag and I took a cab all the way to the airport and went home in a chartered airplane. It was a DC. It was like a single engine Cessna. Landed in Toronto Island Airport. I took a cab to Larry's Hideaway. And over the next couple of days, I looked at newspapers.
Okay.
And at the time, I'd also organized and been connected with an organization called the New Age Center in Toronto, and it was a psychic group. And I'd started going there in the daytime, and they had appointed me the psychic of the group. And a couple of days later, I found this apartment just around the corner from the New Age Center,
Okay.
and I paid 6 months rent in advance,
Okay.
and I put everything I had that I owned at Larry, that I could put in a cab at Larry's Hideaway, and I went up to St. Clair and Avenue Road and started being the psychic at the New Age Center. And then I started calling radio stations across Canada, telling them
Okay.
what I could do, and that's the way I started my performing career.
Didn't they call you back from that original station wanting you to come back? I imagine they must have.
I went back a couple of times. One of the things that I learned early is don't be too available if you're
Right.
performing. Okay,
Right.
I learned that,
Right. Right. Because
and yeah,
yeah,
because
that,
because
that
this
that
is
that holds true across everything in life.
absolutely, absolutely, and I learned that, and but basically what I do, first time, oh well, man, this is incredible. All right, well, next time, oh, that's incredible. Next time, yeah, this is incredible. You're really good. Next time,
Hmm.
wow, you're really good, Robert. They're all equally as incredible. It's just that familiarity.
Oh, of course. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. That that
That's
that
right.
that that all thing that comes in for the first time.
That's right.
So, but I can imagine though that when you were going out there, you could give a reference. You know, maybe they might have heard you or something versus an unknown, totally unknown.
Absolutely. Well, I was already on this radio station, and once again, there
Yeah.
wasn't anybody doing that. And then after I'd started, going to some stations and things, I then got my own radio show on CJRN Radio Niagara. And
Okay.
I went to Niagara Falls every week and did my own talk show, psychic show.
Okay.
Okay. And that was again in the 70s, and I'd had several of those. And then I just had regular spots across Canada.
Right.
And then
Because
then into
you're
the
known.
States, and then around. Well, I was one of the only guys doing it.
Well, but see, the thing is also you were successful. It wasn't somebody that said he was psychic. Obviously,
Oh, I did it.
you did it.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah. That's right.
that is what a great story that is. Not a great story that is.
Yeah. But I've been like that all my life. There was only one way to find out if I can do it or not. Well, let's try doing it.
Right.
And I've done that. No, actually, I want to change what I just said. Let's do it, as opposed to let's try doing it. So let's do it. Um and believe me, I fall. It hasn't all been grand slam home runs at the
Right.
bottom of the ninth.
Okay.
And you win the World Series. It hasn't been like that at all. There have been times where I have bombed out,
Mm-hmm.
and there are times that I've done really well.
Okay.
There was one time I was at this spiritual retreat, and part of my work was to do psychic readings for everybody. This was in the organization that I had.
And then when you say this was for people, or people could come in to see, or this was just for the members?
We were having, this was our organization, the New Age Center, Mind Dynamics. We had branches in several parts of Canada. And I had the privilege of being like the front man. I would go on all the radio and TV shows and perform psychically, and we'd say, okay, if you want to learn how to be psychic, come on down to the New Age Center and stuff like that. And that's what I did. But we were having this spiritual weekend where people came from all across the country to participate. And actually we did it in Alberta, and that's where we did it. So I came across the country too to do it. And what I was supposed to do in the first night was stand up and do live psychic readings for everybody in the group, like perform it. And I was a little cocky in those days. A little bit, anyway, this big hot shot from the East comes out to, prove how great and psychic he is, and performs for all the troops. And first night there, and I'm doing my show, absolutely everything I said was wrong. Everything.
And you were like, what?
And agonizingly, I made it for almost 40 minutes. I was supposed to do an hour. But can you imagine standing up in front of all these people and everything you say is wrong?
And what was it? You must have been asking yourself, what is up?
Well, that wasn't the words I was using, but yes.
I know. I know. You must have been thinking, what the?
You bet. Okay. Actually, I was just stunned. And finally, I just said, I'm sorry, I just can't do this. And I stopped. It was devastating. Absolutely crushing. The next night, I had to do it again.
Ooh.
And I came back and I nailed it. In fact, it was one of the best shows that I had ever done at that time in my life, the very next day. And in spite of the fact that I was so excited, because I, pulled it out of the fire again, it was, what am I going to do if it happens to me again?
Right. And what did you think happened? Because you're a human
Well,
being.
I'm going to tell you. Um, what happened was one of the greatest lessons of my life. I learned absolutely what it felt like to be wrong. And do you know how important it is to know when you're wrong and when you're right?
Of course.
And I found out what it felt like. So now that I know the extreme of that, as we get closer to the line of, is this right? Is this wrong? I know which one has more of the ingredients than the other.
Okay.
Okay. I now I know what it's like. And that was one of the greatest lessons I ever could. And we had a couple of people there, and a couple of llamas that were there, not the animals, the spiritual guys. Um, and I'm sorry.
It's okay.
And they said that it was that it was in my karma to learn what it absolutely felt like to be wrong, so that I would know what it would be like to be right, which also impacted my way of being and thinking. And at this time, what we are one way, we are equally the opposite and everywhere in between. So
Let me
we
ask you though,
are
as a
as
psychic,
good.
aren't you there? Let me ask you, as a psychic and as a human being, but aren't there days that maybe you're just tired, like normal stuff that maybe you just like, I need to lie down or just take it easy?
Well, once again, okay, let's use that as an example. I'm tired, I'm burned
Right.
out, I'm not feeling very well. I hate everybody in the whole wide world because I'm burned, and
Right.
all of a sudden I get this emergency call.
Okay.
Okay, I crawl out of bed, and I say, what are you calling me for? No, not to them. How come I
Right.
have to? Right? Can I even get sick? And then I go to work,
Okay.
I focus, and I know when I'm right, and I knew when I'm wrong.
Okay.
That's how it works.
Robert, have you ever had somebody come to you for a reading, or like you said, one of these calls where you're thinking, I'm not getting the right answer? Like, have you ever
Mhm.
that you're like, I don't know where this is going, or you just, I guess, for lack of a
Well,
psychic wall where you just can't
well,
get?
yes. Because somebody has enough money to get a reading from me
Mm-hmm.
doesn't mean they get a reading from me.
All right.
That's not the main criteria.
Okay.
The main criteria of getting a reading from me is that I have to know that I can do the absolute best I can at that time. And if I can't do the best that I can do at that time, I don't do it. And at that time, when I'm doing a reading, if I do a reading and it's not my best at the time I did it, and that person tells me, then I give them back their money. And
Okay.
that's an absolute 100% guarantee forever. So if
Right.
you had a reading from me in 1975, and now you come and say to me, Robert, that time I saw you at the Cozy Tea Room or Larry's Hideaway, that was a really shitty reading you did for me.
And
I'd
nothing
say,
happened like what you said.
well, that's right. I would say, I am so very sorry. Here is your money back.
Okay.
Now you're not getting today's money back.
Right. Of course not.
Right? You get the bread you paid me at first. Now
Right.
I guarantee that absolutely
Right.
forever. So when I do a reading, before you get to have that reading, I
Mm-hmm.
have to decide, am I proud
Ah.
enough for it to go out? And there are times where I say no.
That's what I was. Have you ever said that to somebody? Said,
Absolutely.
I'm
Quite
sorry.
often. Absolutely. Absolutely. If I'm not able to give that person my best,
Okay.
I don't do it.
Okay. That's great. Because you know what? I think sometimes people think that a psychic is like, you're always going to say yes. I'm going to give you a reading, or I'm
Well,
able to.
that's not a guarantee.
Let me ask you, how about, have you ever had a reading, I imagine, where would you see, yeah, I imagine people usually come to you expecting, like, there's something that they're looking for specifically, more or less. And
Well,
what you're
yeah.
going to tell them is not really what they want to hear. How's that?
Um, sure. Um, yes. Um, Giving bad news.
Right. Whatever.
Now,
I hear you.
now, this is a conundrum. Giving bad news,
Right.
scaring people.
Well,
So, well, that is what can
well,
happen.
and the reason why I'm saying this, it doesn't even have to be scary. I'm going to
Well,
give
I
you an
want to say
example and you tell
scary.
me.
All
Like,
right.
well, scary? No, it could be scary. I'm sure you've maybe seen things that you're like, oh
Well, I
my
tell
God.
them,
You do.
of
And
course.
but how about the person that comes to you and they're thinking, I want so and so back or whatever, something not
I
quite as
tell them if they will be able to come back, or if it's most likely that they won't. I'll give them that information.
right, right. And that's
Okay.
what people, that's what I'm saying.
I
People
don't I
sometimes,
don't miss I don't lie when I do read.
right,
Okay. Now that would be that I've 100% lied or never lied.
right.
Well, I have. I have. But very, very seldom. And I'll tell you about one of the times I lied
Okay.
in a little bit, but I'll talk about not lying and talking
Okay.
about telling the truth. Now, I want everybody to have the happiest reading I can give them, and I want
Sure.
them to leave feeling great. But there are times that people have difficult times coming,
Mm-hmm.
and it's my moral obligation to give them that information,
Okay.
because forewarned is forearmed.
Yes.
If I say at 4 o'clock tomorrow afternoon at the corner of Hollywood and Vine, you're going to get run over by a dump truck, you don't have to be at Hollywood and Vine.
Of course.
So if you can see it, you can change it.
Okay.
Destiny cannot be seen.
I was about to
Therefore,
say, what if that's a person's destiny? You
that's
won't see it
well,
then.
what then you wouldn't see it,
Okay.
because if it can be seen, it can be changed,
Okay.
which answers a whole bunch of other things about destiny. We can get into that too. So I give information, but it's how I give information. And now I'm 73, 74 in the summer. I have been doing this now in next month, January, for 58 years.
Wow.
It's been my career. And in that time, I've done more than 100,000 psychic connections. I haven't seen it all, but I've seen a whole bloody lot of it.
I
Okay.
bet.
Yeah, I've seen a lot. Now, what I do when I know something's going to happen, when I see something's going to happen to somebody, what I do, because when I'm doing readings, I am constantly moving forward and backward in time. And in readings, I often see, the conception and the completion of someone's life, and everywhere in between. And I move back and forth several times in the reading I do. So when I'm sensing something bad is going to happen,
Right.
what I do is I look in the future and describe the positive result of the negative event that they're going to go through.
Okay.
And then what I do is come back and talk a little bit, and then I just drop like a little seed in the water, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I just drop a little hint. Then I talk about the success of the negative thing that's going to happen some more.
Right.
And then I'll talk about other things, and then I'll drop a bigger hint, but not very big. And sometimes I'll take like 35, 40 minutes to
Okay.
give them that information in pieces. But by the
Okay.
time I give them that information, they've already figured it out.
All right.
I've already told them that they're going to survive it,
Right.
and they're already planning to how to deal with it.
Yes, exactly.
So that's one of the ways that I give negative information.
Right. You just don't wallop them over the head with it and you
Absolutely.
go,
And then when I'm doing readings for people, and often when I'm doing a reading for somebody, and often they come to me during some really difficult times. What I also do is I project myself into the future. Say I'm talking to let's say someone's 40, because it's easy to do the numbers. So I'm doing a reading for somebody who's 40 years old, man or woman, doesn't matter. And they're going through an awful time today. What I do is move forward into their life, say when they're like 80, 81 years old.
okay.
And through their eyes of at 81, I describe to them at 40 how they feel at 80 about the way they solved the problem.
Ah, okay.
Okay. And you should see the healing on their faces, Marlene,
Right.
when I
Right.
share that with them.
Yes, exactly. Because they
It's
know
that's
it's
right.
that light at the end of the
That's right.
tunnel kind of thing.
That's right. I thought just about everybody did that. Since I've done, come out of my semi-retirement, a couple of years ago, I'm discovering I haven't met anybody that does do it that way. Just
Well,
me.
I think that some things, like you said, if it's inevitable that there's something difficult they have to go through for whatever reason, their
Sure.
karma, whatever. Maybe they brought
Yeah.
it on themselves, whatever. But if you tell somebody you're going to figure out, or you're going to be on the other end of this,
Of course.
you know,
Yeah.
yeah, as difficult as that might be, the journey, it's different because okay, somebody's telling me it's going to be okay.
Well, and showing them. Yes, of course.
Right. And that
Well,
makes all
that's
the
right.
difference in the world.
That's
Because I
right.
think people are more scared sometimes of thinking this will be permanent or I won't figure it
Oh,
out.
absolutely. Absolutely.
I don't see any answers. I don't see how I'm going to get out of this or how
Of
this is going to
course.
get resolved.
Absolutely.
That I think
Absolutely.
is the worst thing for a person versus you telling them,
You know, one of the things that I've been noticing, I don't know if it was a recorded talk or you were actually talking when you were talking uh, um, talking about I just forgot it for a moment about things that are damn, I forgot it and it was in my mind.
it'll
This is
come
what
back.
yeah, it'll come back, and it was about um how we project ourselves, and in the talk you talked about, is it manifesting and stuff like
Right.
that. One of the things that I've been noticing a lot in the last several years, I guess because I become more aware of it, is manifesting.
Mhm.
And in the old days, manifesting, like go back to so you think, so you are. Maxwell
Right.
Cahill Gibran, like what's that? 50s,
Right.
40s,
Right.
and so you think, so you are. What you think is what you get.
Hmm.
So it's all in your head. Oh, okay. Well, then if you think about it, you get it.
Right.
That means if you think about it and you get it, your master, your manifesting it.
Right.
And then I also will point out to somebody, when you find yourself in a negative situation, when you find yourself overwhelmed or whatever that is, just ask yourself a question. What are you thinking about?
Ah, boy.
What are you concentrating on?
Yes.
And then I
Yes.
say something cute like, I'll bet you dollars to Tim Hortons Donuts, because Tim Hortons is a famous donut chain here. I'll bet you dollars, because I promote Canada, right? So I'll bet you dollars to donuts that Tim Hortons Donuts, that what you're going through is exactly what you're thinking about.
Yes.
And
Yes.
if you change your focus of attention, you will get other things. Then I go on to say, now the instinct is, oh my God, I see the light. I'm going to be a positive thinker. Well,
Mhm.
no. what you just do is move your thinking a few degrees the other way, not all the exact way, because first you can't make that kind of leap.
Right.
Second, even if you could, you can't keep it going because you haven't had
Mhm.
that experience. Move your focus just a few degrees, and in a relatively short amount of time, you'll change the focus of what you're getting.
Well, what happens is that people think, like what you just said. Okay, you're concentrating on the negative aspect or worst
Yeah,
case scenario. Your
yeah,
fears, and I know fears
absolutely,
sometimes they can run the show. And
absolutely.
when people realize, okay, when let's use the generic think positive, whatever. I know that's very new agey, but whatever. Think positive, or let or don't concentrate on that, or that. And then people, you tell them, but it comes back, and it's like, yes, you have to keep
Well,
pulling
yeah.
yourself away from that, pulling yourself away from that thought. It's not like one time,
Can I
because you
give you
will
like a visual?
automatically go back over there, and because that's, believe it or not, your comfort zone. I hate to say this, and people don't get it, but that
Well,
negativity sometimes becomes your whoopee. How's that?
okay, so another way to describe it then, changing your way of thinking. Oh, by the way, when I was in my 30s, at 33, I had weighed over 300 pounds, and over a 2 year period, I
What?
lost like 150 pounds or something like that. Yeah, back. So I understand it. So I'm so
Okay.
so imagine somebody 150 pounds overweight, and you say, okay, you got to stop and get on a diet. And as soon as you start doing that, you'll sort. Well, imagine that person 150 pounds overweight after a week say, holy shit, man, I've been on this diet and I still weigh 300 pounds. Like,
Oh,
right. So what you have to do is build the energy,
sure.
build the the focus, and when you're extreme, you also have to give yourself the opportunity to reach that extreme in the opposite direction. So that's why I say
So
don't
what did you
just
do?
switch.
How did you lose that weight? Willpower? What did you do? I'm sure there's people going, what?
I realized
Mm-hmm.
that at about 30, 31, that if I kept, and I used to chain smoke, 2 packs of
Oh my
cigarettes a day,
God.
and I had the odd drink or two as well. And I realized that if I continued, I was going to die.
Okay.
So I decided that I didn't want to die. And I decided that I wanted to change my life. So the first thing I did was I decided that I would quit smoking cigarettes.
Good.
And what I did is on January 1st of that year.
All right.
And by the way, it was the year that Charles and Diana got married. On January 1st of that year, I said to myself, on July 13th, you're going to stop smoking cigarettes.
Oh, so you
And
gave yourself an ultimatum date?
I gave myself, of course, I gave
Okay.
myself by July 13th, which was my birthday, it was my
Mm-hmm.
32nd birthday. I said I would quit smoking on that day. And what I did at that point, January 1st,
Mm-hmm.
is I started just paying attention to where I was smoking.
Oh, you know one of the secrets? There you
I
go.
started paying attention to where I was smoking, when I was smoking, and how much. So the next thing I did is I took my cigarettes and I
Mm-hmm.
put them in one part of my house. I took my lighter and put it in another part of my house. And I took the ashtray and put it in another spot.
Okay.
And I realized that the two places I smoked the most was when I was on the telephone and when I was in front of the TV. And I kept my cigarettes and everything away from the telephone and the TV.
Okay.
When I wanted a cigarette, I'd have to get up, get the cigarette, get the lighter, get the ashtray, smoke the cigarette. And every time I lit a cigarette, and every time I put it out, I said, on July 13th, you're going to stop smoking.
Okay.
And then I would say on July I you're going to quit smoking on July the 13th, so enjoy this now. And then what I started to do is, I was delaying lighting a cigarette. Then I started to get in touch with the withdrawal symptoms.
All right.
And one of the things that happens when we get withdrawal symptoms is we can't think beyond the moment. All we can think of is we've got this, and we can't think beyond, and we can't see that it'll end. So what I started to do is becoming understanding of the symptoms of the withdrawals. So I started taking longer between each cigarette.
So if you were experiencing a little bit of anxiety, you dealt with it, and then it's like, I
Yep.
can hold
And
out.
absolutely. And I kept stretching the time. And every time I lit a cigarette, I then said, enjoy it, because on July 13th, you're going
And how many packs were you smoking originally on January 1st?
2 packs, two 25 packs.
Okay.
Smoking the odd joint back in those days too, or a lot. So, as well as, eating like a pig.
But let me ask you, as each month we're going, did you cut down the amount?
Oh, absolutely.
Right.
Each day I did.
Okay.
I stretched out each time.
All right.
From time, like each time. And I was going, by the way, I made the vow in England that year, in England in January 1st. And then I came back to visit my friends in England in the last week of June and through the first 2 weeks of July to celebrate that I was going to quit smoking, right? Because July 13th. And so as I just got used to not being afraid of the withdrawals.
All right.
I took it on as an opponent.
Okay.
And I wanted to beat the opponent up, like in
How
the
old were you
ring.
when you started smoking, Robert?
14.
Yeah.
Okay.
I was gonna say very young, probably.
Yeah. On the street. So I went over to England, and when I went there, I brought with me like a couple of cartons of cigarettes just in case I didn't make it, and a bunch of lighters and stuff. And I was withdrawing, and about a week before my birthday, I was out to lunch with my friends, and I was going through the process. I'm on my birthday on July 13th. You're gonna quit smoking, and I went to light up a cigarette. Like I said, it was about a week before my birthday, and I went to light up a cigarette, and I just said, "Hey, who are you kidding? You're either going to stop or you're not. And like, if you're going to stop, then just stop now. Just cut the crap." And I didn't like that cigarette. And throughout the afternoon, I gave away all my cigarettes and my lighter.
See, that's when you're like, that was it.
That was it, right? I was ready, and I kept one cigarette.
Okay.
And I waited until I kept it until I went to sleep that night, smoked that cigarette, and never had another one again for years after that.
Yeah, but see that you were very smart. You gave yourself those 7 months, and you did that mental thing where you started seeing yourself. Yeah.
So when I'm doing life coaching with somebody, even back in those days, but even now that has an addiction or specifically cigarettes, the first thing that I tell them is I congratulate them on their incredible accomplishment.
And they must look at you like,
what do you mean? I spent all my life smoking and stuff. I said, really? Do you realize that you have done a miracle? You have taken what's abnormal to do and made it normal. And what you've learned to do, you've learned to suck smoke in your lungs and still live. Now,
Put that word back.
And in order for you to do this,
You
you
must.
had to spend a lot of money, a lot of time, a lot of effort, and a lot of energy to accomplish this feat, to change what was abnormal to normal. What was normal, what was abnormal to normal. And the only thing you need to do now is take what you made normal and make it abnormal. And you've already proven you can do it. And you don't have to put as much energy into quitting, because it'll be faster than it's taken you to get to this level.
Right. And they must be thinking, I thought that was a compliment, because I'm sure that when you explain it that way, they must be like,
well, it is a compliment. So then people, and I say, okay, let's start, let's plan for it. Now let's start. Okay. So, then someone comes to me and says, man, I've been, trying, and I just couldn't stop. And I said, how long were you off the weed, or off the cigarettes? The guy says, oh, I was off for 6 months. And I say, congratulations. When was the last time in your life you went 6 months without a cigarette? The guy said, I never have. I said, well, hey, congratulations. Now you know for absolute certainty you can go 6 months without smoking. You can do it. Let's try 7.
Right.
And so we look at it as they put energy out. They're not dickheads. Sorry, I guess they're not
fine.
jerks, right? They're not weak. In fact, they did something and put a lot of effort in to it, to be able to do what they wanted to do for whatever reason. But it's important to know, with a little bit more energy, they can make it different again.
Sure.
And that's how I go about dealing with people and their behaviors.
Now, you have worked also with the police.
I have.
How did you get done? How did they come to you? You went to them?
I never do that. I never go to the police. And let me tell you something else that I never do. Well, I almost never do, is I never offer a reading. I never. In fact, when someone comes to me for a reading, I don't care one way or another if they have the reading or book the appointment. I will not do anything to encourage them to do it. Now, I want to be clear. After I've taken them on as a client, different story. But when it comes to whether they're going to book an appointment, I don't care one way or another. And
so
I don't.
What happened? How did the police? Because I know the police are really weird about this. I mean, you hear about it, but they don't want to admit to that.
Okay, so the Witchcraft Act caused it. So here's how it happened.
Oh boy.
As now, there's another city between Toronto and Aurelia, and this city's called Barrie. And Barrie is a little bit bigger than Aurelia. And for years, I used to do a show on CKBB. And in the very, very early days, Barrie, dollar for dollar, was the best earning city for me in the world. Now, it didn't make the most amount of money. It made the most amount of money for the least amount of effort.
Okay.
So when a lot of times in the early days when I was going on tour, I didn't have enough money to get an airplane ticket. Sometimes I didn't have enough money to get a train ticket. So what I would do is I would go up to Barrie, Ontario, which is a 70-mile drive.
Okay.
And I'd drive up there in the morning, and I would rent a motel room. See, I'm going up there in time. I can get a motel room anyway. Then I would go to the radio station, do telephone, do call in, do a 2-hour call in show, run like hell back to the motel, answer the phone. I would do, and I'd book a bunch of readings for the afternoon and evening and the
Okay.
next morning. And so I'd book like 15, 20 readings. And then the
Okay.
next morning I'd leave. So the only expenses that I would have would be the first night at the motel and dinner.
That's it.
And that was it. And everything else was profit. So that gave me the next money to go to the next town. And that
Right.
and that's how I'd go on tour. So I'm in Barrie doing a thing, and there's a knock at the door. It's at night. It's cold night, so I'm remembering it's like wintertime. These two cops are at the door, and they want to talk to me. And
And you're like, oh,
I did not want to talk to them. And one reason is because I was doing readings,
I was thinking, you're thinking,
right?
ah, geez.
Right. I didn't give a damn about getting busted. I was getting readings, and a reading was being interrupted, and so anyway, what had happened several months previous in this beautiful small city on the shores of Lake Simcoe. There was this woman, and I will not tell you her name, but
Okay.
I know her name. There was this woman who was a very, very upstanding, responsible woman, married with a child. Um, she was the type of woman that does everything correctly.
All right.
You know the type.
Sure.
She goes by the rules. She does everything. She was just a very special, responsible. She was a good Italian mother, a good Italian girl,
Okay.
and her and her husband had jobs, and their son got dropped off at daycare center. I believe it was at the YMCA or YWCA. This one particular day, she got a day off. I think she was either a school teacher or a nurse, one of the two. Anyway, she got a day off, and she decided that instead of having her son at home that day with her, she decided to again take him to the daycare, and she was going to go to the hairstylist and have a haircut and all the
Right.
things that women do there. And he got to the daycare. Her car got to the mall. Her car got to the mall right outside where the beauty salon was,
Mm-hmm.
but nobody ever saw her, and nobody ever saw her alive ever again.
So in other words, she never went into the beauty salon.
She never made it. Never made
Okay.
it. And nobody knew what happened. But there was a big outrage. And the police had run out of leads. And they were getting desperate. And this was in the headlines. It was in the headlines and even in Toronto and stuff. And anyway, these policemen came to the door, knocked at my door, and they said that they wanted me to help them in this. And I said that I didn't do those kinds of things. And they said, well, if you want to do readings in Barrie,
Oh, 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 quid
if
pro
you if if you
quo.
if you want to do readings in Barrie, then you're going to do this.
There you go.
And I
Nice.
said, okay, two conditions. One, I finish my readings tonight before I help. Two, nobody knows I'm involved. And they both gave me, because I don't want to be known as doing that. I don't want that.
Right. No, yeah, it's a totally, yeah. But I can
I don't want
imagine,
that job, and I don't
I
want that responsibility. I
because
don't want
chances are that that was not going to be a good outcome as far as what happened to
most of
her.
the time when those things happen, you have to tell the family that their
Right.
child, their wife, their son, their what are dead, and I don't have the
That's a difficult thing to do.
chutzpah. I don't have the um I don't have what it takes
No.
to do that. And
Yep.
if I did, I wouldn't have what it takes to help find the kids.
Exactly. And that's the thing that, and I imagine the outrage here. You have a person not involved in a risky lifestyle and disappears in the middle of daylight. No, no, no
This
back
is
alley.
absolutely that's this woman was pure. So they come and get me, the police, and we go down to the police station. And we started. I'd never done this before. This was the first time. I'd never really done this before, and I was thinking, how would I do this? Because I didn't know the area that well. So I suggested we look at maps, and they put maps down on the table. And I put my hand over maps and stuff like that, and I didn't know what I was doing. And I felt some energy. Well, you got to put on a show. I'm going to get busted,
Right,
right?
right.
So
You're here
it's
like
like,
thinking, oh
I'm
boy.
going to be
Okay.
I'm going to be doing something. It's
Yeah.
like,
Uh-huh.
and anyway, so I found some energy, and
Okay.
then over this area, and I said, okay, so this would have been November, I guess,
Hmm.
and I said to them, okay, guys, we're not going to find her tonight. No matter what we do, we're not going to find her tonight, and we're not going to find her. You're not going to find her until late April, maybe even May. But where you're going to find her is a place near around this spot on the map. And I said, but there's a train trestle, and the train trestle hasn't been used in a long, long time. It's derelict. But on the train trestle says 1910.
Okay.
And they insisted that night that we go out there looking.
Did they know when you described it? Did they know what you were talking about or no?
No.
Okay.
And in one, how they were, they were desperate, and they weren't taking me seriously. Okay, they weren't taking me seriously, but they were doing it because they had nothing else to do. It was like
No,
a
they
long
were
shot.
under pressure. It's like, let's face it.
Absolutely. So we're out driving around, and we're in the wilderness or something, and one of the cops sees an old trailway, or train tracks, and a really ancient one,
Mm-hmm.
and a dirt road, and he says, "Let's drive along here." So we drive along here, and as we get closer, there is a dilapidated train trestle, and on the train trestle says 1910.
Ooh.
And these guys look at me,
I was
and
gonna say, did they both go and look at you like,
yeah,
oh, hey?
yeah,
Uh-huh.
okay, and anyway, the next day they brought out the troops, right? And they all came out and searched the area far and wide, couldn't find her. Anyway, the next day I also was able to do my readings and get out of town.
Okay.
About sometime in April, May, I got a call from one of the guys. And they said to me, "We just want you to know that we found her remains, and it was where you said. Thank
Okay.
you for your help."
That was, and did they find her? Was it because I was thinking, was it because it melted or she just
Yes, that's right.
right? I'm thinking the winter had to go by and
Absolutely. That is indeed what it was. And that area is part of the snow belt as
oh,
well.
okay.
Okay.
Right.
So that is that's what happened.
And what
Um
happened? I imagine what it was, this was a murder case then?
I have it's never been solved to my knowledge.
Okay. But in other words, it was a cold case is what they call it at
It
this
was a
point.
cold case. It was a cold case. And I helped find her.
That's incredible. But
I've
see,
done
that's
other
the thing.
things
Those
like
are the
that.
years that no victim, no crime. Okay. People don't
Yeah.
realize that now it's a little bit more with DNA, but back then people could say, hey, maybe she just decided to leave her husband and her kids.
Well,
She don't want that
that
life anymore. It
yeah, well, that
happens.
wasn't her though. That
No, I
I
know. But
knew
what I'm
that.
saying is,
Right.
as far as prosecuting somebody, once they find the body, that's when the really starts rolling
They
forward.
they didn't have access to anything like that in those days.
Oh, no, no. That's what I'm saying. But
I've
once she
I've
was
done a few
found,
others though. You
and
know.
what happened? So that broke the ice for you. And I was gonna say, didn't they come back to you, or did the word get out that you were good, or how did that work?
Um, I guess then another time similar. This actually happens before what I'm going to tell you now happened before this with this woman. Um, it was early when I started doing radio shows. And when I had the spot on CJRN Radio Niagara, I could phone any radio station on the continent and say, "Hi, this is Robert Lindsy Milne from CJRN Radio Niagara," and the program director would pick up the phone.
Okay.
Okay, so I would phone a radio station and say, "Hi, I'm Robert Lindsay Milne. I'm from CJRN and we're Niagara. This is what I do," and I get right to the guy. And I was applying for a spot on a radio station in Ottawa.
Okay.
And there was no internet those days. There were no networks. If you were at a radio station, it's because your body was in the studio. So you had to
Right.
go there. There were no long distance calls or anything. You had to be there. And again, the way you get the job is you had to, for me anyway, I had to audition. How do you
Mm-hmm.
audition? Go on the air, and if you can do readings, you get the job. If you can't, you don't. And I was going to Ottawa to audition. There's a whole lot of other things about that story, but we'll just stick to the Russian spy. So when I got to well, there are other things almost as exciting, but very definitely
Okay.
another story and very different other color, as it were. Anyway, so I do the show, and incidentally, I got the job. I got the part.
Okay.
Now, again, it's in the 70s, and this would have been like 76, 75,
Okay.
77 at the latest. And in those days, you had dial phones, and in some
That's
parts
right.
of Canada, you didn't even have a an area code, and all you had was like a phone book. And if you
Sure.
were in Ottawa, you couldn't. Very few people had a phone book from Toronto, or right. So you were very limited. So anyway, do the show, get the part, coming out in a month after that to start. And by the way, I was on that station for almost 12 years.
Okay.
So a couple of days into later, or three, whatever, I get a phone call from the program director in Ottawa.
Right.
Ottawa is the capital of Canada, right? That's
Yes.
okay. It's the
Yes.
equivalent of Washington, only minute. Anyway, uh, um, I get this call and say, "Ha ha ha! This guy called me. He's a reporter for TASS News Agency, but really he's a spy. Ha 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 ha!" And he makes a joke. And I say, "Yeah." And he says he wants to interview you. And I say, "I'm not interested. I don't want to know anything about this man. I don't want to deal with him. I don't care if he's a reporter. I don't care if he's a spy. I don't want to deal with this Russian man." It wasn't that I disliked Russians. It was,
Just that something about him, just like,
well, he was also living at the embassy, and he had a diplomatic passport.
and you were
Okay.
like, oh, all
I
right.
don't want anything to do with this. Like I
Yeah.
was like 26 or something,
I was
no.
like, yeah.
So, okay. So I get the show and blah, blah, blah. I come back to Toronto a week, two later. Friends start calling me saying, "Robert, we're getting these calls from, this guy with the RCMP, Royal Canadian Mounted Police." And in those days, they were in charge of the security service, the security of Canada. There was a
Okay.
division of the RCMP is the National Police Force, not quite as prominent as the FBI, but
But
similar.
in that, yeah, that
Yes,
they
that's
covered
right.
everything,
That's
right?
right. But in those days, they also did security. So this guy, and anyway, I get this call from a guy, and he says, "Hello, my name is Sergeant," and I'm not even going to give you his name, even though it was like 30, 40 years ago. Um, he introduced himself. He said, "My name is Sergeant such and such. I'm with the RCMP, and myself and my partner would like to have a conversation with you about a non-criminal matter." And I said, "Is that about the Russian guy in Ottawa?" And he says, "Yes."
And you were like, hey,
And I said, Leave me alone. I'm not interested. I don't know. I don't want to be involved. Please. He says to me, would you please consider this? This is an important matter. And you may be, the bullshit
Uh-huh.
about, you do service for your country and blah, blah, blah.
Right.
Right.
Uh-huh.
And, and he did that one with me. And, I bought it. Yeah.
Hey.
I took that one. Remember, I was a kid, I a young man, in his
No, it's
20s.
like,
I'm going to do that
yes.
one. I'll
Well,
dedicate
because they
myself.
make it sound like, okay, this is more to this than what I
Oh
know,
yeah,
or
right. Okay, I'll do that. So anyway, they make a time to come and see me, the two of them. And one guy came from Ottawa, and the guy that originally called me, he was stationed in Niagara Falls. And as a
okay.
sidebar, in the 1970s and early 80s, during the Cold War, there was more intelligence being passed across the Canadian American border at Niagara Falls
Right,
than
because that sits right there at the
anywhere
border.
in the world.
Interesting.
That was where, and there was an FBI outlet there, and the CIA had a department there too, because of all the spying from the Cubans and because it was so easy to get across the border, Canada to the United
Right,
States.
exactly. Yeah.
So the two of them meet me. Both of them are sergeants, and they meet me and they tell me the story about this fellow. But they tested me and stuff, and they did tell me what the guy's name was, and I said to them, but there's another name here, and I'm hearing the name Petrov, and these guys, their faces turned white, like they were shocked, and they looked at one another, and they looked back at me, and they said, nobody knows that. You're not supposed to. That is somebody that would be your guy's boss, and nobody knows about him. And he said, you're either psychic or you have inside information.
You're like, I'm psychic.
Well, yeah. And so then they really started treating me quite seriously, but they then told me the story of this guy and what had happened. He had been stationed in Washington for his entire career.
All right.
And he lived at the embassy, and he had a diplomatic passport. And he was also a reporter for TASS. But you don't have a diplomatic passport when you're a journalist, not even if
Okay.
you're Russian. If you have that,
Right.
you're a spy or a diplomat.
Right.
He had spent his entire career there. And this was at the ending of the Brezhnev era.
Okay.
And he got the plum promotion or plum spot because, Washington is a plum spot,
Mm-hmm.
for pretty much anybody. He got that spot because of his guys. He was on the side of the Brezhnev team.
Okay.
As the Brezhnev era was coming to an end, and Brezhnev was losing control, his guys in power were losing control, and this guy got transferred to Ottawa.
I was gonna
This
say, yeah, that plum
this
job went bye-bye.
this is not a promotion. The guys,
I
the
bet.
Mounties thought that he got this demotion, and they thought that he thought he was going to be brought home to Moscow and then sent to Siberia.
Wow.
And he was afraid of that. And they were, and incidentally, this guy spent his whole adult life in the Western world.
Sid, how did they find out that he
The,
had contacted you for a
the
reading?
program director, like in the guy in Ottawa. Now, part of the security services, they make contact with all the radio stations, the TV stations, and they're always interacting with, do you hear about and stuff. And
Right.
what had happened is the program director, this guy phoned the program director the program director called me, but he also called the guy in Ottawa and told him.
Oh, okay.
Okay,
Because I was like, how
that's
did
how
they
that
know?
happened. That's how that happened. So um, they asked me would I meet with him and would I do a reading, because what they thought was he was reaching out um, to uh,
To
uh,
to defect?
to the fact, yeah, and he
Okay.
was reaching out through the radio station
Okay.
because he would assume that the radio guy would tell the Mountie. That's
Okay.
okay. That's how it happened, and that so they asked me would I meet with him, and I said yeah I'll do it, and we planned it for the time that I was going to be coming to Ottawa to do my first regular show, and the program director called this guy, the Russian guy. I know his name. I'm just not giving it.
Okay.
Called the Russian guy um, and gave him my home phone number.
All
He
right.
called me, and my Mountie guys arranged for my hotel in my name in Ottawa, and they told me what hotel I'd be staying at. This guy called me at home. I told him I was going to be at such and such a hotel on this day, and we made that appointment. So the day of the appointment, and the guy from Niagara Falls a couple of times came up to Toronto, and he uh, um, versed me on this guy's life from his dossiers, his information, and this was
Okay.
the first time and the last time in my life that I ever allowed myself to be influenced to do a reading. It was the first only time, and
Okay.
and um, and you'll find out why later or shortly. So they were giving and they gave me this guy's life story.
Oh, okay.
And
So
okay,
do you think is that they weren't sure that you were psychic? Do you think that
yes,
was
and they
it?
wanted to make sure that I wouldn't make any mistakes and blow it
Okay.
or something, right?
All right. Okay.
But then they said when you're giving him this information, somewhere along the line, what you need to do is say now this was again 50 years ago. I don't have quite the memory of what the words exactly were, but the concept was while I was doing his reading, I was supposed to say, sometimes when we get into trouble, um, we have friends that we don't necessarily know that there are friends, and you have those friends. It was something like that, right? It
Right.
was
Right. Right. Like yeah.
something like that. So as the other thing our guys said to me is they said, now he's a really big guy. Don't be intimidated. And in the hotel where I was staying, on the day there, um, my Niagara Falls guy picked me up at my apartment, and we went to the airport, and then on the airport I flew to Ottawa in a government plane, and there were three Mounties in the plane with me,
Right.
and from that time all the way through until I met with this guy, in the first whole day I was never left alone. They were always with me, and when we got to the hotel, I didn't even check in. I was registered, but I didn't even
Right.
check in. They just took me straight up to my room, and it was one room, uh, 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 motel hotel room, but there were two adjoining rooms, and those two
Okay.
adjoining rooms were filled with 1970s technology, and three or four Mounties in either room. And then there was this guy and the guy from Ottawa as well, and they were still preparing me. And then they said, now he's a really big guy. Now, don't be afraid. We're all of us are here, so you don't have to be afraid of him. And then he said, they are much more tactile than we are.
Oh, I know where
So
this.
so don't get upset if he moves his chair really close to you.
Okay.
And he's going to touch you and might even touch you on the shoulder or on the arm or something like that. He said, the guy's not coming on to you. He's not trying to kill you. That's just the way they are. They touch more than us.
Yeah.
And I said, okay. So anyway, the guy shows up, comes in, and I start to do his reading. And it took me about 5, 6 minutes that the stuff that they had, fed me was wrong. It was completely wrong. So I just did my best to wipe out
Right.
what I'd been fed, and then I just did a reading for the guy like I would normally do, and it was being recorded on the cassette and everything. And I'm doing the reading, and then I get to the part, the piece de resistance, as it was,
The
and
friend of
I
the
say to
friend.
the guy, sometimes when we're in trouble, we find out that we have friends that we don't know about, and blah blah blah. And when I said it to him, he looked at me, stood up, turned around, and he walked out the door, didn't
Oh, of
say goodbye.
course. He says,
Nothing, nothing, just left.
yeah.
And then, they wait a couple of minutes and the guys come in and say, "Oh, really good job, Robert." And I say, "Yeah, but I blew it. He just left." And they said, "No. When you imply to one of these Russian guys anything about defecting, that's the way they handle it. They don't, as soon as they hear that, they leave just like that." So he did everything what he would have done anyway.
Right. And he
So
probably never, and I guess he must have realized, oh, like what you said, there's probably people in the rooms next to mine.
whatever.
Yeah.
I don't know
I'm out
what
of here.
I didn't. He just was gone. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So a couple of weeks later, the guy from Niagara Falls, uh, outpost. It's not outpost. It's whatever the hell it's called, division or whatever. Called me, and he said, "Can you find anything, or do like what can you do as a psychic?" And I said, "Well, I don't know. Maybe we could." And they said, "Well, how about have you ever considered you could find dead letterboxes?" And I said, "What are they?" And he said, "Well, this is where a dead letterbox is where they drop off information, where it's in past. And we look for that." And so I said, "Sure, let's give it a try." And I went down to Niagara Falls. And we, first of all, looked at maps again. I, checked out maps. And then we would go into the big, huge park, Niagara Falls Park, and I would look for dead letterboxes. I did that with him every month for almost 3 years.
What?
But I was also doing my radio show every Sunday night anyway. So it's not, and I did that. And there were many, many times where we found dead letterboxes where
Wow.
yeah. Then there was one time we were out in the park, we were walking around, and he says to me, "Your Russian friend." And I said, "Yeah." He said, "That turned out good." And that's all I ever found out
And you
about
don't know
what
what they
happened.
meant by that.
Well, I assumed that he made the switch. I
Okay.
assume.
Okay.
And what would have happened is that, we would have got him, and then we would have taken him across the border, or you guys would have come and got him.
Right, right. Because people
he
don't
was like,
realize back then that thing happened with defective. You had
yes.
athletes that would defect, and
Oh,
people
absolutely. And he was a big deal. Like he was
oh,
like a
sure.
very high up one. So now I'd been doing that with the Canadian mounted guy. So at the time I was flying to Ottawa to do my when I was auditioning, I was flying on Air Canada, and I don't know why, but this one time I just decided never had flown on first class. I decided I would give it a try. And on that particular night, the air traffic controllers were on a semi shutdown, the semi work to rule. So flights were delayed. And I was sitting in the first class section of a 727, and there was nobody else there. And there was this flight attendant, and her name was Eleanor. And she came over and talked with me, and we sat and talked for 2-3 hours, and then time for the plane to fly. And then I told her I was going to be auditioning for this radio show. And hey, you guys, would you like to come? I sent a message to the captain and the other and through Eleanor. And I said, be my guest at the radio station and you can see the audition. And they all came down with me.
Oh, wow.
And it just turned out that we were staying at the same hotel, Chateau Laurier. So anyway, the next day, the whole crew comes down, stays with me. And then we went back to the hotel, and then Eleanor came by and said hello. And and then later, they flew out of town. As I did. And then Eleanor called me from Winnipeg because that's where she was based. And she said, I'm going to be in Toronto next week. Anyway, Eleanor and I were in a relationship for a couple of years.
Okay.
And she was doing a type of flight called Havana turnarounds.
Okay.
And in those days, even though America really hated Cuba, Canadians didn't hate Cuba. Some didn't.
Right.
And a lot of people would go to Cuba for the cheap vacations. I would never go to that communist country.
It was like it had nice beaches, tropical. I imagine from Canada going over there to the tropics, it was a big change.
Well, what it was is supporting an enemy nation. That's what it was doing.
It was.
And I refused to be a part of it. Anyway, Eleanor was doing what was called a Havana turnaround. So it's a short flight. They'd pick up a flight, a load of passengers in Toronto, fly to Havana, and then those passengers would get off, and then the people returning home would come back right away. So that was called a Havana turnaround.
Okay.
And one morning, when she had done her, turnaround, I met her at Pearson, and she came out, and she was happy and stuff, and I saw this big envelope in her purse, and I, as I'm driving home, I say, "Sweetie, what's that?" And she said, and she said, this woman, I don't know what the hell her name was, Monica or something. She works on the at the gate in Havana, and she's really, really great, and she's got these friends in East Germany, and mail is difficult getting out of Cuba, and so she asked me if I would, bring it across and mail it to Germany. And I said, you said yes, right? And she said, yeah. And I said, okay. So, I waited a couple of hours, and then I called, my guy in Niagara Falls. And I said, guess what has happened here? And I told them. And it turned out that for several years, Air Canada flight attendants unknowingly were
being the couriers.
Yeah. And because I had done the work with the Russian guy, I picked it up, and we broke a spy ring.
Well, what happens is that I imagine that every time you found one of those letter drop-offs, probably they would do, I imagine, is observe it.
That's all they did. They didn't touch it. They didn't
touch it. They would just see who comes and goes, and that's how they worked from there.
That's exactly what happened. Yeah. So you must know something about that because they didn't interfere at all. They just wanted to know who was doing what and what they were doing and where it was going. Yeah, that's all they looked at.
Right. And then you follow the people around if you have to, whatever.
That's right.
But yeah, those, you know what? And it's because if you think about it, like what she did, it seemed very innocent. Oh, can you please take this and drop it off for me because it's a hassle to get it mailed out. So to the average person, they don't read anything wrong with it. No. It's like, I'm mailing something out for somebody.
And this was like 1978 or 1979, right? It wasn't like last week.
Right. So no, what I'm saying is that, but you, like you said, you said, whoa, wait a minute. That is so interesting.
That's right. Yeah. So that was my encounter with those guys went on for several years.
Okay. And then what happened? You,
Well,
at some point, they,
that never ever became public. And the
right,
only reason I'm talking about it is that I think we got to the 40-year mark, and it's no longer
like a
classified.
classified
Yeah,
kind of
but I'm
thing.
still not going to be using the names.
Okay,
If you
that's
want
fine.
after the show, I'll be glad to, but I'm not going to do it live.
Sure, sure. But you know what? And for somebody that hasn't been alive around those years,
They won't
they they
understand. Yeah,
they wouldn't understand that
yeah,
stuff like that. Remember, there, like you said, there's no internet here.
well, that's right.
So
You
a
know,
lot of the stuff was exactly like what you're describing, which is, couriers, drop-offs, pickup points,
that's right.
things of that nature. You know, and that
And
defecting thing was something that you would hear on and off in the news.
and then at the same time, I was touring. Well, in those early days, across Canada from coast to coast, and then into the U.S. and then around the world.
So when you, at
Yeah,
some point, you just this is what you basically what you're saying is like this was your full-time job, for
it's
lack of a
always
better
been.
word.
I never had another full time job. This is it.
Wow.
Yeah.
And have you ever had a reading, Robert, where you felt like the person, because obviously you're doing the reading. I'm talking about like in person,
Yeah.
where you were like, this person is cuckoo. I don't
Oh,
know about this.
yes. Oh, absolutely. Of course. Of course.
Uh, what do you, it's like, oh boy, I better like,
What do I do? I get them out of my house as soon as I can.
right.
Right.
Okay.
Um, so let's explain cuckoo
Well, when I mean cuckoo, I don't mean
uh,
obviously, but
there have been times where I was genuinely worried that somebody was dangerous,
yes,
and I just wanted to get them out of my house,
right.
and I've done that, um, and I, well, once again, number one, I don't personally care if someone books an appointment. Once I do, I'm very dedicated. Once they do, I'm very dedicated. Um, I'm only interested in doing the best readings that I possibly can. And if I'm not able to do the absolute best that I can, I don't do it.
Right.
So if somebody were a real whack job, literally and figuratively speaking, I'm not going to do it. And the thing I'm going to be doing is getting them away.
Right.
Um, then there are times that someone would be harmless to others, but
Mm-hmm.
dangerous to themselves. And I would
Right.
treat them in a different way than the real crazy, but I would get them out of the house anyway.
Right. Right.
And then there are people that are crazy, but they have flashes of sanity, and I'll
Mm-hmm.
appear to the sane part. Um, and then there's the rest of the people.
Right. Well, and that's why I tell everybody, there's peculiar and eccentric, and then there's crazy,
Whacked out,
as
yeah,
in not pretend crazy, like real crazy. And
sure.
sometimes those people can walk around and pretend they're kind of normal
And
until
then
they're
you get
sitting in
tricked.
front of
Yeah,
you, and
yeah,
you're like,
yeah,
oh, but you look at
yeah,
their
yeah,
eyes, and you're like, oh,
yeah. They're usually the girls that I fall for, though.
oh, there
Oh,
you
they're my,
go, there you
I can
go.
I can be in a room, have been with 100 women. 99 are angels, like
But the
walking on.
one
Right, there's one at the back of the room that is the craziest one, and that is the
that's,
girl for me. Just
but you know what
boom.
that tells me? You probably should have gone to a matchmaker, because it's like, or blind dates, because
Whoa,
probably the matchmaker, you would have said, nah, not for me. But this is a
that's
good
right.
girl. Nah, 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 nah. No,
That's
but like
right.
you said, you'll go into a room and the one,
Yeah. Like, boy, you think that hasn't ruined my life a few times. So
that's funny. That's
yeah.
funny.
So now, there's some of the glory parts, when traveling and doing readings. It's a hard job when I'm on the road. I don't do that now, but when I was, we'd go from town to town or city to city, do shows. People would come. I'd do readings, and then we'd live well. But then we'd go to the next city and the next city, and I did that for many years.
Do you do readings now on the internet at all?
Oh, no, live person, body in the studio.
Oh, really? Okay,
for
okay,
years.
okay. Is
That
now
was before
everything
the internet. Like the peak of my career was through like the prime was through um early 80s into the early 90s. So from mid 70s to the early 90s was the peak of my career.
okay?
I was born in 1949. That was the time where I was doing all my work, which is one of the reasons I've made this um, semi retirement was
Okay.
there's no record of what I did, and I've done a
Okay.
lot, and
Right.
like simply, never mind telling the funny story about how I learned how to do readings on the telephone. The point is that I was the first one to do that, and I was the pioneer.
Exactly. And if you
And
wouldn't say that story, nobody would know it.
that's right. And I want it recorded. Like
Sure.
I want my contribution to be acknowledged.
Right.
So
Of
that's why I'm doing
course.
it, right?
Of course. And again, for those of you who have not been alive that long, people don't realize that back then, whether it was what you did or even people that were trying to get their records played on a radio station,
Yeah.
you basically had to do what you said, knock on the door and, convince somebody, a
Oh
DJ, to
yeah.
play your music,
Oh,
or what you
absolutely.
did, which
Oh,
was
absolutely.
audition. There was no this was like you had to be out there and sell yourself. You had to be a salesman. How's that?
That's right. I
You
did.
had
And you know, so I'm now at this point in my life, and I jokingly say, after 58 years, I'm an overnight success. And because like I'm getting recognized around the world now more than I did when I was at the peak of my career, simply because of the access to the information.
sure.
Um, and I'm still accomplishing goals and having dreams, and I'm achieving them now. Um, Over 20 years ago, I set a goal to get on Coast to Coast.
Okay.
That was a goal. And I couldn't get on Coast to Coast because I didn't have a book,
Right, because yeah, that's
because I
this.
couldn't read and write very well. So,
Okay.
so I couldn't get past the, well, it's not true. You can get past the secretary, so to speak. I couldn't get it because one of the criteria is you got to be credible and have a book.
Have something to talk about. We'll talk about your book, Robert, and then
Well, yeah,
exactly.
right. So I never, but I have never given up. I have never given up that goal. Well, any of my big goals, and I didn't know how I was going to do it, but I
Okay.
vowed that I was going to do it. And then along came the story about the guy that had the superbug that was dying of an incurable superbug. I helped find the cure for that incurable superbug. While the guy, now I'm not the like the star of that story, but I
Okay.
had a psychic role, and if a psychic, not me, a psychic hadn't have been involved, this guy would have died. And he was in a coma for 8 months, and I helped find the cure for that incurable superbug. And there
But
was a book written about it.
what happened? When you say a super bug, was it just
Oh,
an illness that he got a cold?
no. No, 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 no. Okay, so this is a little. I'm not sure how much time we got. This is
No, no,
another.
don't worry.
Oh, okay. Okay.
I run the show. You know what that's like. So go
Okay.
ahead.
All right. So here's, um, so I've always been at the top of the field.
Okay.
Okay, like I've always been, um, I've always been recognized there, and when
Right.
I'm around other psychics, so it just always been like that. I remember the day at the cozy tea room, the first day I started. Like, can you imagine? Here's this homeless kid, half starving, comes in and starts doing tea leaf readings. And I looked around at all these old people and said, "You're going to tell people I started here." I really had the chutzpah to say that,
Yeah.
you know.
Desperation will do that to you.
And you know what? Actually happened.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, besides that, um, so. I'm just trying to remember what I was thinking about
So
because
no, that you were explaining to me about that. When you say superbug, are we talking?
we're talking about an infection that you
Okay,
get, and it's so infectious, it's antibiotic resistant.
okay, all right. Which is
Okay,
what I was trying to figure out. Was it that they didn't know what it was? In other words,
they
without
knew
knowing,
what it was.
they
So
knew what it was. Okay,
here's the story. So um, this happened to two clients of mine. So the woman, and I can give you all the names in this one.
okay,
Her name is Stephanie Strathdy. Dr. Stephanie Strathdy. And Stephanie is a professor of epidemiology. She's a Toronto girl, by the way. Professor
okay,
of epidemiology at the University of California. She is a professor of epidemiology and she's an associate dean of the epidemiology department. And she's got like about a bazillion awards and credibilities. And she's involved with all these famous institutes and stuff like that. Like she's a heavyweight epidemiologist. And she's famous for her research and development in AIDS around the world. Her husband, Tom,
okay,
is a professor of um, experiential psychology. He's got a PhD in
okay,
experimental psychology and another PhD in psychiatry.
okay,
He also is a professor at the same university in the
okay,
psychology department, and he's associate dean of the experimental psychology department as well. These
okay,
two people, and they happen to be married. And I met Stephanie when she had just graduated from the University of Toronto with her PhD. And I did her first reading, and she had kept in touch with me over the 30 years, and we have this really close connection. So
okay,
Tom and her meet later in life. There's a difference in age. Tom is older. Their second marriage, and Tom is an interesting guy. He's like he's a real kind of macho guy, macho, and he's a man's man type guy.
okay,
And he reminds me of an old Indiana Jones kind of guy.
okay,
So he's like 6'5", he's a professor. And when he was a young man, he used to do research in field. And
okay.
he got kidnapped by the Sandinistas and
Oh
was
my
held
God.
in, just about starved to death and all.
Okay,
And he's gone through all these wonderful things that these, macho guys go through. And
right.
he's also this professor, and he's very well known and respected professor. So and there's an age difference. He being, several years older than Stephanie. But it's a beautiful relationship. So Tom in later life ballooned up to a huge amount of weight, like 300 and some odd pounds, like really big.
Okay,
And he was on and he still hadn't finished ballooning up. He was on that path. And this one year I did a reading for him, as I did with him and Stephanie, more with Stephanie over the years. And I said to Tom in his reading, I said to him, in 3 years from now, you're going to be more than 100 pounds lighter than what you weigh now. And you're not going to want to wear any of the clothes that you wear now because they'll all be too big, because you'll have been more than 100 pounds. You will have lost more than 100 pounds. And then I went on to talk about other things, as I always do when I'm, giving people information like that. And after however long, I said to him, however, you're going to be 100 pounds lighter. Before that time comes, there's an illness coming, and it's in your stomach. You might even feel it now. And you are going to get sicker as sick as you possibly can. Now, this took me half an hour to say.
Right,
Okay,
right. You're giving the
okay.
condensed
I
version here.
That's right. I'm giving the Coles Notes version of the Coles Notes version. Okay, I'm doing it
Mm-hmm.
really fast. So, and I said to him, in you're going to get as sick as you possibly can get sick without dying, and you're going to lose more than 100 pounds. And then I said to him, it seems to me the destiny is to lose 100 pounds. So you can either listen to what I've just said, and it scares the hell out of you, and you take care of yourself and your body and lose more than 100 pounds, or you're going to get sick as you possibly can get sick without dying and not die and lose more than 100 pounds. And my feeling is it's up to you, but you can do it the easy way, you can do it the hard way. And I was that direct, but also, as softer in how
Mm-hmm.
I said it to him. So it scared the hell out of him for a couple of days, and ate celery and carrots for a couple of weeks or something, and then anyway, um, he stopped. He didn't follow through. Now, these are upper echelon people, and they're used to traveling in exotic places around the world anyway. And they always
Okay.
have these, but they had this one dream vacation, and they wanted to go to Egypt and tour the pyramids.
Okay.
So they booked this trip. It was near the end, and most of the time when Stephanie is making an important decision or whatever, she calls me and talks with me about it, and that's
Okay.
it's been our relationship. And we talked about the relationship or the time away, and I said, it was okay, everybody'd come home and everybody be alive. Yeah, so they get their trip and they go away on their vacation, and it was like the end of November of that year, maybe it was mid December, and they're away in Egypt and they're touring the pyramids, and Tom had been really ill, feeling ill way before the trip, but didn't
Okay.
cancel it. He went away. And Stephanie asked me the question, is he going to be okay? And will he survive? And I said, of course, he'll come home. And because I didn't look very far, I knew the guy would live. So I didn't take it very
Right.
much farther than that, because I had forgotten the talk I had with him previously. So anyway, they're in the pyramids. Tom's not feeling very well. He's getting sicker and sicker. He's got this pain or something in his stomach. They're going through the pyramids. He gets so sick he faints in the pyramids.
Ooh.
They have to carry him out of the pyramid. And they take him back to the hotel. The doctor from Cairo comes over and looks at him and says, "Oh, you're really, really sick." And they transfer him from the hospital, or from the hotel to the hospital. While he's at the hospital, he contracts the most potent superbug on the planet. This one was 100% antibiotic resistant.
But this was not what he was sick from originally.
No, he had a cyst on his pancreas.
Oh boy. Okay.
Okay. And he catches the superbug in Egypt. Now, as a sidebar, Stephanie, when she wrote her PhD, that particular super virus was what she wrote her PhD on
Oh my.
before it was as potent and as powerful as it was, and before it was antibiotic resistant. But she
Okay.
wrote her PhD, it was like a normal, everyday, awful superbug, but could be cured. And then it graduated and got more intense, right?
Okay.
So she wrote her PhD about that
Of all the
30 years
coincidences.
before. Yeah. And that was when I came on board too, by the way, when she
So
wrote her.
did
So
did they realize that early on what that he was sick with that superbug, or was it
in
till
in
later?
Egypt, yes, they
Okay.
knew in the hospital that he had. No, they knew he was really, really sick. They couldn't help him, and he was medevaced to Germany.
Okay.
Okay, to one of the best clinics in the world for whatever he was going through. So he was medevaced there, and then they found the superbug that
Okay.
was 100% antibiotic resistant, and that meant if you get it, you die. There's no cure. So now, just as Tom gets medevac to Germany, we're getting relatively close to Christmas that year, and I was feeling like a bag of shit. I was just feeling awful. I had the flu or a cold or
Uh-huh.
whatever, and I didn't want to talk to anybody or see anybody. I was just feeling terrible. And late at night, my Skype phone rang, or my thing on, and I got up and walked to the computer, and I saw it was Stephanie, and I answered. And the first thing that I said to her was, "What took you so long? I've been waiting to hear from you." Which, in fact, that was true. I'd been getting concerned, and I'd been sending thoughts out to her. "What took you so long? I've been waiting for
Okay.
you." And incidentally, that's in the book that's been written.
So she must have been like, okay,
Well,
but
I do that shit all the time.
I know I was gonna say if
I
she'd
do
been coming
that.
to you for
I
30
just,
years,
I
she
just,
knew,
I
she
just,
knew, she
yeah,
knew,
I just do that just for
she
fun.
knew. Oh, okay, yeah.
That's right. It's kind of like my way of.
Was he? Let me ask you.
He
At
was
this
in a
time,
coma,
I was gonna say he's already in a coma by then, right?
already in a coma, and
Wow.
and and diagnosed never to come out.
Oof.
Okay, he was in a coma for 8 months. So she calls me, tells me the story, and I say he's going to get really, really sick, but he's not going to die. But he's got this 100% antibiotic resistant superbug. So Stephanie um, is got a brain like Sheldon Cooper. You know the guy in Big. Okay,
The
she's
Big
got a
Bang.
mind like him. She has
Okay.
a photogenic memory. It's just shocking, and she may be on the spectrum a little bit because when you're that bright, you're not always the most. Anyway, but but she's a beautiful person. She's really loving, but she's probably a little bit on the spectrum. She certainly was a geek when she was a kid.
There you go.
Anyway, I say to her, Tom can live through this, and you can find the cure. And I said to her, you have experienced everything you need to find the cure. You have been through things like this before, and you found the cure. You have gone through these types of things. The only difference is the name, but you've gone through it and you've done this before, and you can do it again. And on that inspiration, she decided in that time period, she was going to find the cure. This is a true story, by the way, of for her dying husband.
Because I imagine she called you probably thinking that you were gonna tell her he's gonna die, or I mean, maybe she wanted to
No, she
find.
was reaching out to me because I told him that they were going to be together for a long time. She was reaching out to me because she reached out to me when shit happens.
But I imagine at some time she must be thinking, I'd rather hear it from him first that this is
Well,
going
that
to
might
end
be the
badly.
case, but she calls me when things are in trouble. So I say to her, Tom's not going to die, and blah blah blah. And then I tell her that you can find a cure. And then she opened her mind. And what I said to her also is, I said, you can sit here in Germany uh, in panic because he was like in all the people around him were wearing hazmat suits and stuff like that, and he was in a coma, and I said, you can sit around here worrying yourself to death, or you can do something about it. And if you do something about it, you can find the cure. And she decided to do it. By the way, she found the cure, and she created a group of the most brilliant minds on the planet.
Okay.
and some of the most brilliant scientists on the planet all got together in a collaboration from around the world to
Okay.
find the cure for this illness. And she put it all together. And I thought what I was going to be doing was being her support going through the process. But as it turned out, I created a mind link with
Okay.
Tom, and I was in psychic contact with him 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Wow.
And I knew what was going on with him, whether he was okay, whether he was in trouble, his state of mind, things like that. And I knew when his vital signs changed. And I was getting and I was having meetings with Stephanie every morning. And at the very beginning, I said to her, I'm really afraid of giving this medical information. I'm afraid that I'm going to say, like I've always been and still am afraid of doing medical stuff. I'm
Right.
not a doctor. I'm not smart enough to do that kind of stuff. I'm also not a quack, and I
Right.
also am aware of my limitation.
Like, what if I tell you something and I just say it the wrong way? And I know what you mean, like, as far as the
What if
intention
I
is good, but the delivery might
what if I
be
tell you something and it kills you?
right,
Like that,
exactly.
right? Right. Okay. Because I don't have that awareness. So I've always been afraid of that, and I've always respected
She
it.
must have said, "Don't worry about it." At this point, I
Well,
imagine.
here's what she said to me. She said, Robert, um, you're not responsible. She said, I have a team of the most brilliant people on the planet. Each one of them, including you, are an expert in their field. And it's your responsibility to tell me what you see with no holds barred, because I'm going to take what you tell me with all the others, all the other advisors do tell me, put it all together and make the decision that I think is the right one. You're not responsible. You're responsible to give me the absolute truth.
Oh,
Like, oh, huh, I've never had that opportunity before.
right. So you just like
And it was
give
the
it to her
first, it was the first time in my life that I just let it all hang out with no concern. I
because
just
she
let
had
it.
given you the green light.
She gave me the green light, and I did and said things that astonished me. There were times that when I was so tuned into Tom, I was a couple of days ahead of what the doctors were saying. There were times I was so tuned in, and with all that was going on, when I would sometimes when you hear me speak now, I get a little slangy and and say things in kind of street ways. I do that sometimes when I'm doing readings as well, and I would make a lot of slang type expressions when I was describing what Tom was going through. After a while, the doctors started using the same kind of expression that I
Oh,
was using after I'd said it, right? Like a week
right.
later or things like that. By
Okay.
the way, that's in their book. And in that, and by the way, I told her that one, he's going to live. Two, there's going to be a book about it, and that's true. And they're in the process now of doing a movie, and I said that as well.
What were they trying to find?
They
An
were the
antibiotic,
cure
a
that well,
treatment?
they were trying to find something that would cure him.
Okay.
So there was this one time that and how I knew Tom was okay and when he wasn't was I visualized a flame, a candle and a flame. And
Okay.
when the candle flame was strong, I knew he was okay, even though he was in a coma, even though he's sick and he's got the superbug. I knew that he was all right. when his vital signs changed, so did the candle flame. And then there was this one day I woke up and looked at that candle flame. It's in my head, right? Looked at the
Mhm.
candle flame, and it would look like it was going out. It would look like it was going to blow out. And Tom, I realized Tom was cold.
Okay.
He was afraid. He didn't know where he was. He was unconscious. He was sick. And all the people walking around him were wearing hazmat suits, and he can hear them speaking.
Oh.
And they were saying he was going to die. And he was letting go.
Okay.
And he went into septic shock. By the way,
Okay.
in that time he went through septic shock 7 times.
I
Well,
was gonna say that usually kills people.
right, he went through it 7 times.
That's incredible.
So I said to Stephanie, Tom is in trouble, and he needs to see his girls, his daughters. He's cold, afraid. He doesn't know what's going on, and he's letting go. He needs to see his girls. Yesterday would have been good. No, I in those days when I started doing this, when she said, let it all out, I was really straight, and I said yesterday would be a good day. Today's a good day. Tomorrow's not so good. If you wait longer, don't bother. And when I said it was like, if you wait any longer, he's going to die. Don't bother bringing them over. That night, the girls arrived.
Okay.
And I knew they arrived because I saw the flame get bigger.
Okay.
And then they arrived, and Tom came out of his septic shock during it that broke, and his vital signs started, stabilizing and settling down. And there are a lot of people that could have done that, what I did. There's a lot on the planet that can do
But
this. I'm not the only one. But what happened, I share with every psychic on the planet, that it's now been proven that we can make a psychic connection with somebody who is unconscious, and we can help them, and they know
because
sometimes what
basically
we're
what you're
saying.
describing is that even though he was unconscious to the people around
He
him.
had consciousness. That's right.
Right, exactly. Exactly.
And if a psychic hadn't have been involved, Tom would have died.
So he
And
stayed in Germany all this time?
several months, and then he was flown to California.
Okay.
And then Stephanie was with her team looking for the cure, and she brought 3 things to me. And Tom was in his 8th month in a coma, and he was really close to death.
Okay.
And Stephanie had narrowed it down
Okay.
to 3 cures, and
Mhm.
we're at the point where they could only try one.
Okay.
And she, of course, all the scientists got, first opinion of which one they should choose. And
Okay.
then I was the last one to be consulted. And Stephanie said, I found these 3. And she said, let me tell you them. And every decision she made, she ran by me. But she
Okay.
had other decision makers too. So she starts off and she says, the first one we've come up with, and this is called phages. And she started to explain them. And I said, that's the one. And she said, well, let me explain it. And I said, that's the one. And she said, let me explain it and tell you the other ones. And I said, yeah, okay. And she explained it. And then she told me the second one. And I said, the first one. And she said, Robert, would you just listen to this? And I said, okay. And she told me, and I said, the first one. Then she told me about the third one. And I said, the first one. And she said, why? And I said, because it's like little Pac-Man. And they'll go after the superbug, attack it, kill it, and eat it. And she said, that's exactly what they do.
There you go.
And she made that decision. And the name of the decision was called phages. And phages are harvested from sewer water. Um, Phages are excrement.
Okay.
And it was in the 1920s and 30s in Russia, they
Uh-huh.
were doing experiments by injecting healthy stool in someone who has had bowel and intestinal illnesses. They
Right.
were in um, injecting them with phages, uh, um, and the concept was the healthy bacteria
Right.
would attack and kill the unhealthy bacteria. That was the
Okay.
concept. Okay.
Right.
And then about 1939, 1940, penicillin was invented.
Okay.
So, most people would have rather have had a pill than a turd. So, like the
I'm sure.
so like the yeah, the research ended
Okay.
when all these superbugs started coming along. They started doing more research.
All right.
And the American Army had done research in phages, the American Navy had, and researchers around the world had been doing this, but they had never treated a human being
Oh,
with it. And it got to the point where Tom was hours from death. It took a long time for everybody to get everything through the FDA and blah blah blah. Tom was within hours of death, and they were deciding, getting ready to, you know, give him the phages. And they did not know if they injected him. It was an IV. If they injected him, whether it would kill him or not.
good.
And they injected him once. And this was in California. Now I was in Toronto at the time. They injected him with an injection. I don't know, half hour, 40 minutes later, his vital signs got a little bit stronger. Like this guy was hours from death.
Okay.
He had no muscle mass. He had faded away. He was on his way out. Like his vital organs were starting to
Right. They
shut
had run
down.
out of time at this point. It sounds like his body's
Absolutely,
organs and stuff just couldn't take it.
absolutely. It was yeah. So anyway, he gets a little bit stronger. So they give him another hit. Gets stronger again. And then throughout the night, they give him several. I mean, didn't kill him yet, and they
Okay.
just kept sticking the needle in his arm. And then when Stephanie went to the hospital the next morning, and she went up to Tom, and he'd been zapped with phages several times,
Okay.
and she went over to him and grabbed his hand, and he came out of his coma,
Oh,
opened his eyes, and looked at her, and then closed his eyes and fell asleep and
right.
never went back into the coma again. And they continued to treat him with phages. And that was like, I think in 2017, I think. Um, and he's still alive, and he's well, and he's cured.
He
And and
recovered everything.
and he recovered. He came back to life. And I shared this. This is the first time. And this book is written by two scientists. Tom and Stephanie wrote it together. These two scientists. They got a big, big advance from the royalties for the
Right.
royalties.
Mm-hmm.
um, it became, and it's changed the way medicine treats certain illnesses. It's changed the
Let me
way.
ask you, how did he catch it? Was it something he ate in
I don't know.
Egypt?
Know.
Because
I don't know
the
what
reason
it
why I
was.
say
I don't
that
know
is
how.
like,
He caught it in the hospital.
oh, he caught in the
He
hospital
caught it
already.
in the hospital, and
Oh,
Egypt was famous for having that superbug. They were infamous for that, and he caught it there. That's what happened.
okay. I thought he had caught it when he was still
No, he
just
caught it.
there.
He caught it in the hospital.
Wow.
That's when he caught it. But The
Let me tell you, that's yeah, you were right though. He lost that weight, I bet, huh?
yeah, yeah. Well,
Not the way
well,
he wanted to, but
one of the first times I saw him after he came out of his coma and he was up walking around, and um, I looked at him the first time I saw him, and I said to him, "Well, Tom, you look great. I know an easier way to lose 100 pounds, and everybody laughed like hell, you know.
but I
But
bet that must have been like,
and I mentioned in the book many times, and this is a book written by scientists for scientists, and I mentioned in the book 26 times, although that was only about 10% of the work I did.
well, but still, it was
But
one
it
of
was
those things
there,
that,
and it is there, and it opens the door for the generation behind me
of
to be
course,
able to make a contribution. That's what it does, and
of
that's really
course.
what I'm so proud of. That I did this for us, me, like my people.
Well, this is the thing that I think a lot of times people think only of psychic work as in, like what I said earlier, people calling about like relationships or stuff that's more, how can I say,
Mundane, every day,
like,
every
oh, am I
day.
going to get that job?
No,
That kind of
well,
deal.
as Tony Soprano talks about, loan sharking, it's my bread and butter,
Right. Yeah.
so it's the same thing in my world. Yeah, that's my bread and butter. Am I
Right.
going to be okay? Am I going to keep my job? Am I not going to keep my job? Is my
Sure.
husband? That's the bread and butter. I'm
Hmm.
I'm privileged enough to be able to get these big jobs.
Right. And also, and I'm sure also because this person, you had a lengthy relationship with her
Oh well,
before that she
it was
believed
my
you
number was up.
absolutely,
That's right. It was my turn. That's right. That's what.
that she believed in you, like, and that's really considering that she was a scientist,
Oh yeah.
which always want that evidence, empirical, like, yeah, I want the facts, but
Yeah.
she's still like, see, that goes to show you that inside all these scientists that say, nah, I don't believe in the psychic stuff. I'm sure.
She didn't when she came to me for a reading, and then she did, and she
Hmm.
has no problem telling the world as an epidemiologist, as a scientist. She doesn't understand how it happens, but
Right.
she knows and has seen it happen.
And I think where a lot of them run into problems is when they can't explain how, then they choose not to.
Yeah, that's
Just because
right.
they can't explain how. They
That's
can't
right.
model it. They
Well, that's
can't
right.
reproduce it. So it's like, no, but
That's
there
right.
you go.
Yeah.
Robert, it has been wonderful to
Thank
speak to
you.
you. For my podcast listeners, where should they go to? What is your website where they can
Well,
find
there's
you?
there's a couple of things you can well, my website, www.robertlindsymilne.com, just as it's spelled right there.
Okay.
And you can find me on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, iHeart, UK Paranormal Radio Network. Um, and if you're and I still do readings, so you can get me on my website
Okay.
and all those things. And I have my own podcast. Oh, that one, and it's
Well, I was
called
going to say, yes, you
My
have your
Side.
own
It's
podcast.
called My Side of the Crystal Ball, and you can find that on all those places too.
Right, because this is like the other side. You're the psychic as far as what
That's right.
life is like
That's right.
there. Of
That's right.
course.
That's
Of course.
right.
And you must have a lot,
Yeah.
so many great stories.
Thank you.
I'm sure you must have heard things that you're like, oh, yeah.
Oh yes, I do. I I've I haven't heard it all,
Oh,
but I've heard a lot, and at this point in my life, at either end, I've if I find anything new, it's
uh-huh.
extreme, and I often don't want to see it.
Right. It's like, I had heard, I had something you
Mhm.
don't hear every day. And I know, exactly, exactly. That's
You
the thing
know,
where it's like, oh, that one again.
I'd rather have that than, oh my God.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Uh,
Has anybody ever confessed to like a crime, like serious crime, like a murder, or hinted at it? That you're like, oh, don't tell me, I don't want to know. Like, I'm a psychic, not a priest.
um, on a couple of occasions,
You know.
I've told them I don't want to know.
All right.
Shut your mouth.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I'll tell them that um, I will not give you. I will not give you confidentiality
Right.
if you tell me. So if you tell me, I'm telling.
Shut up.
Please, that's right. So please don't. And could you just please leave now?
I that must have wigged them out. That must have wigged them
What,
out
did I
when you
kick
said
them
that.
out?
Yeah. Well, the thing of the because I have a feeling not all the time. I think there's people that commit crimes and horrible things and they take it to the grave. They have no problem. But there's other people that for some reason need to share it with somebody, anybody. You know.
Um, in the early days, earlier, as in up until around 40, I got tricked a few times by some sociopaths, but I don't
Hmm.
get tricked very often anymore.
Ah,
I,
you
I,
know all
I
the earmarks, huh?
well, I know what it feels like. I know what the energy is. They can be real in their lying, but the energy is just not quite as full. I guess
That's
that's about.
interesting. That is
Um,
so interesting. See.
yeah, but going back to I think I talked like when we first started talking about
Hmm.
recognizing what it feels like when you're right and what it feels like when you're wrong. So I would go to that reference.
Okay.
Is this oh, this is this what's this feel closer to?
Right.
And and usually I'm right.
Yeah.
And before I make my decision, I'll check it even farther.
Sure. Of course. Robert, it has been
Thank you.
absolutely great. I'm going to
Thank
have a
you.
link to the credit of the show. I could talk to you for hours. I mean, I'm sure that, yeah. Did you have you written a book, or are
No.
you? You need to write a book.
Well, I need to learn how to write better.
No,
But
let's have
there's
somebody dictate to somebody then.
that's what I've heard. Yeah. So my focus in life is taking care of the situation in front of me. I can't solve world hunger.
Oh, of course
I
not.
can't create world peace. What I can do is feed the hungry person in front of me. I
Hmm.
can distract people if they're fighting to help them stop fighting.
Sure.
Um, and that's what I can do.
Right.
And I like to do that and see what I'm doing rather than a concept of helping. So I focus on helping that person in front of me in the moment.
Right. The destiny is to cross paths with you.
That's correct. That's right.
You know.
And I always several times a year I cross paths with people that they cross paths with me that they're in the midst of a physical crisis and
Hmm.
my intervention
Exactly.
saves their life, like they didn't get hit by a car, or
Sure.
they didn't succumb to an overdose of fentanyl, or and
Hmm.
these things happen several
Sure.
times a year.
And you're there to give the warning
I'm
or the
there to
heads
give
up.
the warning, or
But
to pull them out of the water, so to speak. Yeah.
absolutely. Thank you again, Robert. It
Thank
has been
you.
absolutely wonderful. I hope you're going to come back to the show because we got to talk some
Anytime,
more.
just let me know. Or talk to Michelle and say, hey, have him
Absolutely.
back on, and
Yes,
I'll
yes,
be
yes, yes,
there.
yes. Absolutely.
Thank
Again,
you.
thank you. Good luck to you. And
Thank
Happy
you.
New Year.
Thank you. And same to you. Thank you for having me on.
On the contrary, it's been my pleasure. Bye
Thank
bye.
you. Bye bye.
Wow. Okay. I'm going close to 3 hours, so I'm going to keep this short. It's been great. That's, you know how many stories, 50 something years of psychic readings? And that's the ones, and you can tell he's a real gentleman about some of the stuff that he discloses, and I understand why. But I'm not kidding. He should write a book, dictate it to somebody. It would be a runaway bestseller. Because again, some of these things, it's like, how can I say, ordinary people sometimes, or in ordinary situations, things happen that, what is it? Life is stranger than fiction. It's true. You know, yeah, a lot of us live regular lives as an unexciting, which sometimes that's not a bad thing. But then sometimes you will have, especially when people come to see a psychic, that you see a side of them or about their lives that are like, what is the world is this? And let me tell you something, that thing that he described at the beginning, being a teenager on the streets, I mean, obviously he did well for himself, but that's very, I felt bad. I felt bad. And this was many, many, many years ago. And obviously, like I said, he did well for himself. And unfortunately, I know that happens, um, when, a teenager, you find life on the streets is better than being at home. That's got to be pretty bad. That's very bad. That's very, very bad. When you have this is your choices, and living um, by your wits on the streets is better or safer than being at home, which is where you should be as a child. Because I'm sorry, I know there's people out there that go, Marlene, a 13, 14, 15 years old. Well, you know what? In my book, at that age, you're still a child. You're an adolescent. How's that? You're in the bridge between childhood and adulthood, but still, the streets is no place for a child. Oh, there you go, Marlene. All right. So anyway, guys, come back next week. I have a lot of interesting guests coming on. I will be bringing Robert. This is so great. What a great interview. I will be bringing him back because I got to tease more stories out of him. Everything was so interesting because, again, for those people that think that just going to the psychic is like, oh, is so and so love me? Will he come back? Or am I going to get that job? Or am I going to keep that job? See, there's more to it than that. So till next time, guys, take care. And even though it might be a little bit staggered, Happy New Year. Expect good things.